The lead J-20 pilot's voice crackled through the encrypted frequency with something that wasn't a warning, it was contempt. Confirmed target, cargo bird, unarmed, no escort. A pause, then laughter. Actual laughter from a man about to murder 12 people in a slow, fat airplane that couldn't even fight back. He gave the order without hesitation. Kill it. And just like that, 10 of the most advanced stealth fighters in the world turned their noses toward one defenseless C-13. Oh, and the woman inside it, who they had already decided was already dead. Before we go any further, if this is your first time here, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications so you never miss a story like this one. Drop your city in the comments below. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now, let's go back to the beginning. She had a way of walking into a room that made people look away. Not because she was forgettable, not because she was plain or unremarkable, or quiet in any way that suggested weakness. Captain Evelyn Carter walked into rooms in a way that said very clearly, I am not here to be noticed. And most people, being most people, obliged her completely. At 38 years old, Evelyn had spent the last 4 years doing the kind of flying that nobody writes songs about. No afterburners, no radar locks, no missile tones screaming in your ears like the voice of God telling you that someone somewhere has decided today is the day you stop existing. She flew C-130 Hercules transport aircraft across the Pacific Theater, the great gray workhorse of the United States Air Force, a plane that the pilots who flew fighters privately called the truck. Not always unkindly, but always with that slight edge of superiority that fighter pilots carry around like a birthright. Evelyn didn't mind. She had made peace with what she was now, or at least she told herself she had. The morning of the mission that would change everything began the way most mornings at Anderson Air Force Base began, with bad coffee, worse weather reports, in a briefing room that smelled like aviation fuel and institutional carpet cleaner. Evelyn walked in at 0530, her flight suit already zipped her dark hair, pulled back with the kind of practiced efficiency that said she had been doing this particular motion for so many years, it no longer required thought. Her crew was already there, all 5 of them arranged around the briefing table with varying degrees of alertness. Staff Sergeant Marcus Webb, her loadmaster, was 26 years old, built like a fire hydrant, and possessed of a grin so wide and easy that it made him look perpetually like he had just gotten away with something. He was eating a granola bar and reading something on his phone that was making him laugh silently, his shoulders shaking. Webb, Evelyn said without looking at him. Whatever it is, put it away. Already put away, ma'am, he said, and the phone disappeared so fast it might never have existed. First Lieutenant Danny Cho, her co-pilot, was 29 and Korean-American, and the kind of meticulous that made you trust him completely. He had already laid out his mission checklist on the table in front of him, organized by color-coded tabs. He nodded at Evelyn when she sat down, and she nodded back, and that was the entirety of their morning greeting, which suited both of them perfectly. The other 3 crew members, Flight Engineer Specialist Tara Okonkwo, Navigator, First Lieutenant James Reeves, and Systems Specialist Corporal Yusuf Dantes, filled in the remaining chairs with varying degrees of coffee consumption and pre-mission silence. The mission itself was routine. Routine was the word everyone used, and everyone meant it. A supply run to a forward operating location near the edge of the Philippine Sea, medical supplies, equipment, parts, encrypted communications hardware. Nothing exciting, nothing dangerous. A milk run in a cargo plane on a cloudy Tuesday morning. The intelligence officer who gave the briefing was a young major named Torres, who spoke fast and with the clipped certainty of a man who had never once been in a situation where the intelligence turned out to be wrong. He pointed at maps. He mentioned patrol corridors and deconfliction zones. He noted that there had been increased Chinese naval activity in the broader region, but characterized it as posturing. The word he used was posturing, and he said it with the faint dismissiveness of someone describing a minor social inconvenience. Evelyn listened. She always listened. It was one of the things about her that people noticed if they paid attention, the quality of her attention. She didn't just hear briefings, she absorbed them. Her eyes moved in patterns that were not random, tracking from the map to the weather overlay to the deconfliction corridor chart, in a sequence that suggested she was running calculations that were not visible on any screen in the room. Danny Cho noticed it sometimes. He had noticed it the first week he had been assigned to her crew, and it had unsettled him slightly because it was the kind of attention that didn't quite belong in a transport unit. It was fighter pilot attention, The kind that assumed the briefing might contain a detail that could kill you if you missed it. He had never said anything about it. After Torres finished and the room began to loosen into pre-mission movement, Evelyn stood and turned to her crew. "Wheels up at 700, she said. "Weather's going to be rough in the first hour. We'll climb through it, not around it. We're already tight on time. Questions?" Webb raised his hand. "Ma'am, the cargo manifest shows we've got a pallet of what's labeled as calibration equipment that nobody seemed to want to describe in more detail than that." "Then it's calibration equipment, Webb." "Yes, ma'am. Just wanted to note it." "Noted. Anything else?" Nobody had anything else. Evelyn looked at each of them for a moment, a brief, quiet sweep, the kind of look a person gives when they are fixing a picture in their mind, though she would not have been able to tell you that's what she was doing. "All right," she said, "let's go fly." The C-130 lifted off the runway at 07:022 minutes behind schedule because of a hydraulics check that Taro Okonkwo had flagged and refused to sign off on until it resolved cleanly. Evelyn had waited without visible impatience, which was its own kind of statement. Most pilots grumbled about delays. Evelyn simply sat in her seat and used the time to re-examine the weather charts. "She's a strange one," Tara had said once to Marcus Webb, in the kind of low voice that people use when they're talking about someone who they expect to somehow hear them anyway. "Strange good or strange bad?" Marcus had asked. Tara had thought about it. Strange like she knows something we don't. At altitude, the Pacific stretched out in every direction, with the kind of scale that could make a person feel either very small or very free, depending on who they were. Evelyn had always felt free up here. It was the only honest thing she allowed herself to feel without analyzing it first. The first 90 minutes were clean. The weather was rough as predicted, the kind of chop that rattles cargo pallets and makes co-pilots grip their armrests with slightly more pressure than they want to admit. But Evelyn flew through it the way she flew through everything, with the minimum of motion and the maximum of precision. No unnecessary corrections, no overcorrection, just the steady, reading the air quality of a pilot who understood that the sky had its own logic if you were patient enough to listen to it. Danny Cho watched her work sometimes in a way that he didn't fully understand. Her control inputs were smaller than any pilot he had ever flown with. Smaller and somehow more effective, like she was having a conversation with the aircraft instead of arguing with it. "You ever fly anything before C-130s?" he had asked her once early in their time together. "A few things," she had said. "Like what?" A pause. "Different platforms." And that had been that. At the 2-hour mark, they were 600 miles east of the Philippines, flying at 24,000 feet, when James Rippes looked up from his navigation display with an expression that Evelyn recognized immediately, not because she could see his face from where she sat, but because of the way he stopped moving. "Captain?" His voice was careful, controlled in the way that voices get when the person speaking them is keeping something out of them deliberately. "I'm seeing something on the edge of the radar picture." "What kind of something?" "The kind that's multiplying." Evelyn reached forward and pulled up the threat display on her own screen. What she saw made everything inside her go very quiet. Not quiet like peace, quiet like the moment before an explosion, when the pressure wave hits you before the sound does, and for just a fraction of a second, your body understands something your brain hasn't caught up with yet. 10 contacts, fast movers, coming out of the northwest in a spread formation that was not accidental. Not patrol geometry, not intercept geometry either, not yet, but close. Close enough that the difference didn't matter much. "Cho," she said, her voice was completely level. "I see it," he said. His voice was not completely level. "Get me AWACS on guard, now." "Captain, those contacts are—" "I know what they are," she said. "AWACS, now." Danny's hands moved. Static. Then the voice of the airborne warning and control aircraft operating 100 miles to the south came through with the flat professionalism of a controller who understood that the tone of what they were about to say mattered almost as much as the content. "Cargo 77, this is Sentinel. We are tracking your picture. You have 10 repeat, 10 high-speed contacts bearing 315 closing. Best assessment is Chinese J-20 platform. We are alerting theater assets. Maintain current heading and altitude. Do not maneuver without clearance." Evelyn clicked the transmit button. "Sentinel Cargo 77, what's our escort availability?" A pause that lasted approximately 2 seconds. In the context of what was on her radar screen, Those 2 seconds were enormous. Cargo 77 nearest available assets are F-35s out of Kadena. Estimated time to your position, 18 minutes. Evelyn looked at her radar. The 10 contacts were now close enough that she could read their closure rate clearly. At the speeds they were traveling, in 18 minutes, she would have been dead for approximately 16 of them. Copy Sentinel, she said. We'll manage. In the seat next to her, Danny Cho turned and looked at her with an expression that contained in roughly equal parts disbelief, fear, and something that was trying very hard to be trust. We'll manage, he said. Don't panic, she said. I'm not panicking. You're about to. Captain. Danny. She said his first name, which she almost never did. He went quiet. I need you to be exactly as good as I know you are. Can you do that? He held her gaze for a moment. Then he nodded. Good, she said. Now listen to me carefully because I'm going to tell you some things that are going to sound insane and I need you to trust me anyway. In the cargo hold, Marcus Webb had felt the change in the aircraft's behavior before anyone told him anything. The subtle shift in the engine note, the almost imperceptible increase in the sharpness of Evelyn's control inputs transmitting through the airframe, and he had keyed his crew interphone. Hey, Tara, you notice anything up front? Okonkwo's not answering right now. James Reeves cut in his voice tight. Webb, stay in your seat. Strap in. Now. What's happening, Lieutenant? A long pause. We have company. Marcus Webb was 26 years old and had been on 47 missions across 2 combat deployments and had thought in a reasonably honest assessment of himself that he was not the kind of man who scared easily. He reached down and made sure his harness was fully secure. Then he sat back and put his hands flat on his thighs and focused on breathing. In her seat, Tara Okonkwo was already running through every system in the aircraft with the speed and focus of someone who understood that whatever was about to happen, she needed everything they had to be working perfectly. Hydraulics, fuel balance, engine performance. She ran the checks without being asked because she was exactly the kind of crew member who understood that the time to be asked was already past. Captain, she said over the interphone, all systems nominal. Bird's in good shape. Copy Tara, Evelyn said. Keep her that way. The first missile alert came 40 seconds later. The threat warning system lit up with the kind of urgency that is designed to be impossible to ignore. The radar warning receiver screaming a tone that bypassed cognition entirely and went straight to the part of the brain that is older than language, older than reason. The part that says, run, and Danny Cho made a sound that was not quite a word. They're locking us, he said. Multiple lock-ons. Captain, I know, Evelyn said, and something happened to her voice. It didn't get louder, it didn't get harder exactly, but it changed the way a key changes when it finally finds the right lock, the way a person's face changes when they stop pretending to be something they're not. It became something that Danny Cho had no frame of reference for in a transport aircraft because he had never sat next to anyone who sounded like that in a transport aircraft. She sounded like someone who had been here before, many times, and survived every single one of them. Cho, listen to me. She said, her hands already moving, already feeling the aircraft's responses with the sensitivity of someone reading a language in their fingertips. We are not going to outrun them. We are not going to hide from them. We are going to make them wish they had picked a different target. We're a C-130, Captain. We can't. I know exactly what we have, she said, and I know exactly what they think we have. Those 2 things are very different. Now pull up the terrain data on your nav display, the low ground that show me the ridgeline to our south. That ridge is, Captain, that's barely navigable airspace for us at this altitude. The clearances are... Show me the ridge, Danny. He showed her the ridge. She looked at it for exactly 3 seconds. Then she smiled. It was a small smile, private. The kind of smile that belongs to a very specific kind of memory, the kind made in cockpits at extreme altitude, at extreme speed and extreme danger, when something inside you that is otherwise dormant wakes up and recognizes its element. Danny Cho saw that smile and felt for the first time since the contacts had appeared on his radar something other than pure fear. He couldn't have explained it, he just felt it. The lead J-20 was now 8 miles out and had achieved a solid missile lock on the C-13IO's massive radar signature, and its pilot call sign Dragon 1, a 14-year veteran of the People's Liberation Army Air Force. A man who had trained for exactly this kind of kill was speaking calmly to his formation. Target is non-maneuvering, unarmed. I have lock. Formation maintain, current spread, on my count. He had done this kind of calculation 100 times in simulation. A slow, unarmed transport aircraft against 10 advanced fighters was not a battle. It was an execution. He allowed himself briefly the satisfaction of a man who understands exactly how the next 4 minutes will proceed. He did not know her name. He did not know anything about her. To his targeting systems, she was a radar return, a signature, a kill. He pressed the count. And Evelyn Carter rolled to sea, 130 left, and put its nose down at an angle that was by any rational standard of transport aviation completely insane. The G-force hit the cargo hold like a physical wall. Marcus Webb slammed into his harness so hard he lost the breath to make any sound at all. Tara Okonkwo's head snapped sideways against her headrest. James Reeves's checklist slid off his knee and disappeared into the space behind the navigator's console. In the cockpit, Danny Cho gripped the yoke with both hands and heard himself saying something that was not quite a prayer and not quite a profanity, but contained elements of both. And Evelyn Carter flew. She flew the way she had not flown in 4 years. She flew with her entire body and her entire mind and every piece of knowledge that had ever been burned into her by 10 years in the most demanding fighter aircraft on the planet. She flew with muscle memory that did not forget, could not forget, because the kind of training she had been through does not write itself on the surface of a person. It writes itself into the structure, into the bone. The C-130 was not an F-22. It was slower, heavier, less responsive, with the aerodynamic personality of a very large and very determined brick. But it had things that no fighter jet had. It had mass, it had momentum, and in the hands of someone who understood energy management at the deepest possible level, mass and momentum were weapons. She pulled the nose through the bottom of the dive and used the speed they'd gained to drive into a climbing bank so steep it would have been alarming in a fighter. In a C-130, it looked like something between a miracle and a malfunction. Dragon 1's missile, already in the air, already tracking, chased the thermal signature of 4 massive turboprops through a maneuver that its guidance systems had not been programmed to expect from a cargo aircraft. It was designed for a target that moved predictably. The target was not moving predictably. The missile lost lock for 1.3 seconds. In combat aviation, 1.3 seconds is a lifetime. It detonated 70 meters behind the sea. 130's tail, close enough that the pressure wave hammered the airframe like a giant fist, close enough that 3 crew members in the cargo hold thought for one shattering moment that they had been hit, close enough that the flight engineer's board lit up like a Christmas tree with sensor alerts from the concussive stress on the airframe. But they were still flying. What was that? Marcus Webb's voice stripped entirely of its easy grin. What the hell was that? Evaded, Evelyn said, and her voice was so calm that it made the calm itself feel like a kind of power. Stay strapped. Danny Cho was staring at her. She could feel it even in the middle of everything she was doing. She didn't look at him. Captain, he said, who are you? She didn't answer, not because she was ignoring him, but because the next part required everything she had, and she had stopped being able to afford the luxury of words. Dragon 1's voice came over an open tactical frequency, clipped and sharp, the first real edge of surprise in it. Target maneuvered. Formation reacquire. 2 and 3 come around on the south bearing, cover the escape vectors. He was recalculating, adapting. He was good. She could feel his quality from the way his formation was already adjusting smooth and fast, the way very experienced pilots adjust when the easy kill turns into something else. But he was also in this moment making his first mistake, because he was still thinking about her the way he had thought about her at the beginning, as a cargo pilot who had gotten lucky, and she was about to teach him the difference. She brought the C-130 around in a sweeping turn that brought them low, dangerously low terrain, following low, the kind of altitude where the ridgeline to the south was no longer on the navigation display as a distant feature, but as an immediate, concrete, very large obstacle directly ahead. Captain, Danny said, and this time his voice had climbed about half an octave. That ridge is 400 meters clearance, she said. We're fine. That's not very much clearance. It's enough for a fighter jet, maybe. Danny, the ridge was filling the windscreen now. Trust me. He closed his eyes, then opened them again because he decided that whatever was going to happen, he was going to see it. He owed himself that much. She flew them through the gap in the ridge at an altitude that by the instruments was technically safe and by every other metric was absolutely terrifying. The rock faces on both sides were close enough that Danny could see the individual striations in them, the dark horizontal lines of geological time laid bare in the stone. And behind them, three J-20 fighters who had been tracking their descent path hit the geometry problem of following a large aircraft through terrain at an angle their aircraft could manage, but their tracking solutions could not. Two broke off. One continued and misjudged the clearance and pulled up so hard and so late that it put itself into a zoom climb that consumed its energy entirely and left it hanging at the top of its arc, slow and vulnerable and alone. Dragon 1 saw it. 4, he snapped. Recover, get your energy back. Formation, regroup on. They're arguing, James Reeves said from the navigator station because he had been listening to the tactical channel. I can hear them arguing. Good, Evelyn said, and there was nothing in her voice that was unkind, but there was something in it that was very old and very certain. That's exactly what we want. She pulled the C-130 back up out of the low-terrain pass and turned northwest directly back toward the bulk of the enemy formation, and Danny Cho turned to look at her with an expression that had completely left the territory of fear and entered the territory of something he was going to need a long time to find the right word for. Are we going toward them, he said. Yes. On purpose, yes. Why? She finally looked at him, just briefly, just for a second. Because they're not expecting it, she said, and because the last thing an enemy pilot wants is a target that behaves like it's hunting. She clicked the transmit button for the crew interphone. All stations, this is the captain. We are in an active engagement. I need everyone to hold on and trust me. We are going to get through this. But it's going to be a rough ride. Is everyone with me? Marcus Webb's voice came back first. With you, ma'am? Tara Okonkwo, with you, Captain. James Reeves, after a half second that contained a complete internal crisis that he resolved with remarkable speed, with you. Yusuf Dante said nothing for a moment. Then, God help us all, but yes, with you. Evelyn Carter brought the nose of the C-130 around, pointed it at 10 of the most advanced fighter jets in the world, and accelerated. Dragon 1 saw the return on his radar change course and vectored directly toward his formation. And for the first time in 14 years of combat aviation, he felt something that he did not immediately recognize because he had so rarely experienced it. Uncertainty. Formation, he said, and there was a new quality in his voice that two of his wingmen noticed and neither of them mentioned. Target is maneuvering toward us. Adjust. Dragon 1, this is Dragon 6, the youngest pilot in the formation, 24 years old, 3 years in his aircraft. Target is coming at us. An unarmed cargo plane is coming at us. I see it. Dragon 1, what is this? Dragon 1 did not answer immediately. He was recalculating, running the geometry, trying to understand what he was looking at. What he was looking at was a woman who had spent 10 years learning to think in 3 dimensions, at the edge of human physical tolerance, who had been certified as a weapons instructor on the most advanced air superiority fighter the United States had ever built, who had walked away from combat, not because she was broken by it, but because the cost of it had been measured in someone she loved and who had just spent 4 years learning to be invisible. She was not invisible anymore. She was exactly what she had always been, and she was coming right at them. The sky above the Philippine Sea on an otherwise unremarkable Tuesday morning had just become the most dangerous place that Dragon 1 had ever been. He just didn't know it yet, but he was starting to. 37,000 feet above the AWACS controller, named Rodriguez, had been watching the radar picture for 6 minutes with the focused intensity of a man watching something that he could not quite make fit any category in his experience. He keyed his microphone to the duty officer. Sir, he said, that cargo aircraft is not behaving like a cargo aircraft. The duty officer leaned in, looked at the display, at the movement vectors, at the way the large, slow blip was threading itself through the geometry of 10 fast-moving hostiles with something that looked impossibly deliberately, almost like aggression. Get me everything we have on the crew of Cargo 77, he said. Already requested, sir. A pause. And get me the F-35s from Kadena on the line. Tell them to push their speed. Tell them. He stopped, looked at the display again, at the cargo plane, at what it was doing, at what it was somehow surviving. Tell them to hurry, because whatever's happening out there, I don't know how much longer it can last. He didn't know then that he was wrong about that. He didn't know that what was happening out there wasn't survival. It was something much older and much more deliberate and much, much more dangerous. It was a hunt. Dragon 1 made a second mistake at the 4-minute mark. It was a small mistake, the kind of mistake that only becomes visible in retrospect when someone sits down with the data and traces backward through the decisions to find the exact moment where everything started to come apart. He split his formation. It seemed like the right call. The cargo aircraft was coming at them, which was insane, which was inexplicable, which violated every logical framework for how an unarmed transport behaved under threat. And Dragon 1's training told him that a split formation created multiple attack vectors that no single aircraft could defend against simultaneously. 10 fighters against one cargo plane attacking from 4 different quadrants. It was mathematics. It was doctrine. It was exactly correct on paper against any opponent who was operating within the expected parameters of a cargo aircraft. Evelyn heard the geometry change before she saw it. She felt it in the spacing of the radar returns, in the way the blips on her threat display began to migrate outward from their center point like a hand opening. And she exhaled through her nose, once the way a chess player exhales when the opponent does exactly what the chess player needed them to do. "They're splitting," she said. Danny Cho looked at his own display and his stomach dropped. "That's Captain. That means they're surrounding us. We need to..." "No," she said. "It means they gave us space." "Space for what?" "For this." She rolled the C-13090 degrees to the left and pushed the nose down in a dive so abrupt that the aircraft's 4 engines, spooled up to maximum continuous power, took half a second to register the change in their workload. The G onset was fast and hard, and in the cargo hold, Yusuf Dantes made a sound that was entirely involuntary and entirely human and entirely understandable, given what his body was currently being asked to tolerate. The 2 J-20s that had been closing from the northeast Dragon 2 and Dragon 3 had committed to their attack vectors. Attack geometry in fighter aviation is built on assumptions about target behavior. You set up your run based on where the target is going to be, not where it is now. And when the target violates those assumptions, when it suddenly goes somewhere, it has absolutely no business going. At the speed and angle it has no business achieving. The attack run becomes a geometry problem with no clean solution. Dragon 2 pulled up hard and broke off his attack. Dragon 3 held his run for 1 second longer. 1 second of stubbornness or confidence, or perhaps just the fraction of a moment it took for his brain to override his training and accept that the large, slow aircraft in front of him was not doing what large, slow aircraft do. And in that 1 second, Evelyn had already put the C-130 exactly where she needed it, between Dragon 3 and Dragon 4. Dragon 4, who had been coming in from the south on a convergent course with 3, suddenly had a very large radar return crossing his firing solution at an angle that made any missile launch a potential fratricide event. He broke left and climbed hard the way pilots do when they've been presented with a problem faster than their conscious mind can process it, and their survival instincts simply take over. Dragon 3, with his attack run now threading through a space that contained both his own wingman and the target in a configuration that his fire control system could not resolve cleanly, pulled off his own run with language that Rodriguez, monitoring the tactical channel on the AWACS, would later describe in his debrief as creative and vehement. Dragon 1 heard his formation fragmenting around him, and his voice went flat and cold. "Reform," he said. "All elements reform. Do not let it control the geometry." Dragon 1-2. Dragon 2's voice. "That aircraft just did it maneuvered between 3 and 4. A C-130. It put itself between 3 and 4. I see it." Dragon 1, "How is a..." "Focus," Dragon 1 said, and there was something in his voice that had not been there at the beginning. A tightness. The first small signal of a man whose model of the situation is failing to match reality and who is not yet ready to admit it. "Reform on my position. We attack in sequence, not spread. Understood." "Understood." His formation answered one by one, but the rhythm of the responses was different than it had been 15 minutes ago. At the start, those confirmations had been crisp automatic, the voice of a unit that believes completely in the outcome. Now they were still professional, still controlled, but fractionally slower, fractionally more careful. The voice of pilots who are revising their assumptions. Evelyn heard it. She could not have explained precisely how, but she heard the difference. She had spent 10 years listening to voices on tactical frequencies. With the whole of her attention, had learned to read the emotional texture of a pilot's voice the way other people read faces. And what she heard in Dragon One's formation was the first tremor of something she had been waiting for. Doubt. They're reforming, she told Danny, coming back to a consolidated attack. Single axis this time. Danny was looking at his display and at her alternately, as if he could not quite decide which was more difficult to process. How long have you been doing this? He said, not accusatory, almost wondering. A long time, she said. And then I stopped, and now I'm doing it again. Why did you stop? A beat, just one. The kind that contains entire landscapes of memory compressed into something too large for any single breath to hold. Later, she said, I'll tell you later. He nodded. And whether he believed the later or not, he turned back to his instruments and did his job because that was what she needed from him, and because somewhere in the last 8 minutes he had stopped being afraid of her and started trusting her the way you trust someone who has been exactly where you are and come back from it, which is a different kind of trust than anything else. The AWACS controller, Rodriguez, called at that moment. Cargo 77 Sentinel. Cadena birds are pushing. Estimated time to your position now 14 minutes. Can you maintain? Evelyn clicked to transmit. Copy Sentinel. What's the current threat picture? 7-7, we're still showing 9 correction, 9 active contacts. One has left the engagement zone, uncertain if it's a technical abort or maneuver. Advise you continue evasion and do not engage. She almost smiled at that. Do not engage, as if she had the means to engage, as if engagement was what she was doing. Copy Sentinel. 7-7 out. She turned to Danny. 9. One of them left. One of them left, she confirmed. Dragon 4, probably shaken enough from the fratricide geometry to request abort, or his leader pulled him back. Danny stared at her. You did that. You deliberately made them almost shoot each other. I made the geometry make it possible, she said carefully. They almost shot each other because I gave them a reason to. That's the same thing. It's a very important distinction, she said, because we don't have weapons. We can never be the thing that shoots them. We can only be the thing that makes them uncertain enough to shoot themselves. She paused. Or each other. In the cargo hold, Marcus Webb had found, in the absence of anything useful to do with his body, that his mind had become very clear and very focused in the way that minds sometimes do under sufficient duress. He was listening to the engine note, in the airframe, in the interphone, cataloging information, building a picture. He was also quietly holding the cargo straps of the nearest pallet with both hands. Not because he needed to, because it felt better to be holding something. Tara, he said on the crew interphone. Yeah. You doing okay? A pause. The sound of Tara Okonkwo running through a systems check with rapid practiced efficiency. I'm doing what I do, she said. That's about as okay as I can manage right now. Same, he said. James Reeves cut in. We've been airborne for 2 hours and 22 minutes, he said. Just in case anyone was tracking. Why does that matter right now, LT? Marcus asked. It doesn't, Reeves said. I needed to say something concrete, something with a number in it. That's fair, Marcus said. Yusuf Dantes had gone very quiet. He was a 23-year-old systems specialist who had enlisted because his older brother had served and made it sound like the most meaningful thing a person could do, and who had spent 18 months doing signals work on transport aircraft and had never once been in anything that qualified as danger, and who was now strapped into a seat in the cargo hold of an aircraft that was performing maneuvers he had not known cargo aircraft could perform, while 9 fighter jets attempted to kill everyone aboard. He was holding a photograph. He carried it in his left chest pocket, always the way some people carry good luck charms or saints' medals. His mother had given it to him on the day he shipped out. She was in the photograph, and his grandmother and his little sister, and they were all laughing at something outside the frame that he could no longer remember. He looked at it now. He said nothing to anyone. He just held it. Dragon 1 reformed his remaining 8 jets. Dragon 4 had indeed been ordered back, a decision that Dragon 1 already knew would be scrutinized and criticized, and that he had made anyway because 4's radio voice had had something in it that he did not want in his formation right now into a single coherent attack line. Staggered, altitude deconflicted. The kind of formation that made any evasion geometry maximally difficult because every escape route was covered. It was a good formation. It was correct doctrine. Dragon 1 was a good pilot and a correct pilot, and his formation was both of those things. And if he was flying against anything that existed within his experience of aviation, it would have worked. Evelyn saw it forming on her radar and felt the familiar pressure of a problem that had a solution she hadn't found yet. This was a feeling she knew. She had built a career on finding solutions to problems under conditions where no solution was supposed to exist. Her weapons instructor certification had required her to construct tactical defeats from positions of absolute disadvantage in the air over and over until the construction became as natural as breathing. Cho, she said, terrain. South. No, north. He pulled up the northern terrain chart. That's Captain, that's open water to the north. There's no terrain feature for 200 miles. I know, she said. Show me the cloud layer. He pulled the weather overlay. There was a significant cloud deck building to the north and east, the remnant of the weather system they had climbed through earlier, now restructured into a solid overcast layer at 16,000 feet, thick enough to constitute a genuine obscuration. That's solid IMC, he said. Instrument meteorological conditions. Zero visibility inside terrain. If we go into that, they follow us in on instruments, she said. Yes. And they're faster than us, so they'll overtake us in the cloud. And when they do, they'll be very close. That's the opposite of what we want. Unless, she said, we're not in the cloud when they get there. Danny Cho was quiet for 3 seconds. Then you're going to go into the clouds and then come back out. We're going to go into the clouds, she said. Change our heading by 140 degrees, descend 3,000 feet, and come out on a completely different vector than we went in. And while they were sorting out where we went, the cloud deck is going to be full of 9 fighter jets who are very close to each other and very confused. Another silence. Then quietly, intensely. That could make them dangerous to each other. That's the idea. And to us, if any of them come out where we do. Yes, she said simply. So we have to be precise. He looked at the cloud deck, looked at the radar, looked at her. You've done this before, he said. It was not a question. Twice, she said. In training, both times it worked. And in training were the other aircraft trying to kill you. Yes, she said. That was the training. The formation of J-20 CES was now 40 seconds from missile range. Dragon 1's voice came over the open frequency, calm and measured and very certain, and Evelyn listened to it and used it the way she used everything as information. He was lining up for a sequential launch sequence. Multiple missiles staggered timing designed to prevent any single maneuver from defeating all of them. It was the right call. She would have done the same thing. She pushed the thrust levers forward to the maximum continuous power setting and turned north. 7-7 Sentinel. Rodriguez again, his voice carrying the first real edge of alarm. Your vector is taking you toward the weather cell. Advise you maintain southerly. Sentinel 7-7, understood. Continuing on current heading. A pause. 7-7, confirm you are intentionally entering IMC. Affirm. A longer pause. She could almost hear Rodriguez deciding whether to argue with her. He decided not to. Copy 7-7. We'll lose your picture in approximately 40 seconds. Good luck. Thank you, Rodriguez, she said. And then because she heard something in his voice that deserved acknowledgement, we're going to be okay. She did not know if that was true, but she believed it, and believing it was not nothing. The clouds swallowed them whole. Inside the cloud deck, the world contracted to the instrument panel. Everything that mattered was reduced to numbers, altitude, airspeed heading vertical speed, and the discipline of trusting them completely and exclusively, because inside a solid cloud there is nothing else to trust. No horizon, no ground reference, no sky, just the instruments and the knowledge that they are the only thing standing between you and confusion that can kill you in seconds. Evelyn turned the heading bug to the new course and began the descent with a precision that would have looked to any observer like something done in absolutely normal circumstances by a pilot who had complete control of herself and her aircraft. Which was true. All of it was true. She did have complete control. She was calm. The fact that 9 jets were entering the same cloud deck on the same approximate heading behind her at 3 times her airspeed was simply a condition of the problem, not a reason to be anything other than precise. Heading 305, she said. Descend to flight level 190. Keep the speed up, Danny. Don't let her bleed below 230 indicated. 230, he said, his hands on his controls, watching his instruments with the absolute focus of a man who has made the internal decision to function at his best, regardless of what his nervous system is telling him about the wisdom of being here. He was good, Danny Cho. She had known it. But knowing it and seeing it were different things. Behind them, Dragon 1 entered the cloud 32 seconds after they did. Dragon 1 on his formation frequency. All elements we are in, IMC maintain your spacing, radar contact on target bearing. A pause, the pause of a man whose radar picture is not showing him what it should be showing him. Contact is not where expected. Reform on Dragon 5 urgent. Dragon 1, I have Dragon. 7 on my radar range, 1 mile, he's on my left. Dragon 7 simultaneously, 5 you are close, break right. Dragon 1, hold your positions. Do not maneuver without my call. Dragon 3, Dragon 1, I cannot sort the target from the formation returns. Too much clutter in here. The cloud was doing what clouds do to radar-heavy formations flying close together in zero visibility. It was turning the picture into chaos. Multiple aircraft, close spacing, high speed, in conditions where the pilots could see nothing outside their cockpits. Every radar return was potentially a fighter jet, or potentially the target, or potentially both. And the geometry of the situation was generating exactly the kind of high workload, low information environment that makes even very good pilots make very fast mistakes. Dragon 1's voice went up half a register. Just half. All elements break left. Extended left turn, get spacing. Break left now. Evelyn heard it. She heard the formation frequency because she had a receiver tuned to it, a technical capacity of the aircraft that was not normally used for this purpose, that she had asked for access to at the start of the mission without explaining why, and that the young signals specialist had enabled without question because she was the captain. She heard Dragon 1's voice, and she heard the stress in it, and she made her final turn. Coming out of the cloud deck's southern edge, at flight level 190 on a heading that was 140 degrees different from the heading she had entered on in a position that was geometrically the last place any of the 9 J-20 pilots expected her to be. She came out of the cloud, going southeast. The formation of J-20s was still inside the cloud, heading northwest, sorting themselves out, burning energy on the breakaway turn, with their radar picture full of each other. We're out, Danny said, and his voice had something in it that had not been there before. Not quite elation, too much was still happening for elation, but a kind of stunned, burning certainty. We're out, and they're still inside. Not for long, she said. 30 seconds maybe. Dragon 1 will sort them. He's good. And when he does, we'll have 12 miles of separation, and they'll need to rebuild their attack geometry from scratch. She was already scanning. Threat display, radar, the AWACS frequency. How's the airplane? Everything's green except the earlier concussion sensors from the near miss. Tara Okonkwo's voice still doing what she did. Hydraulics nominal, fuel balance okay, engine performance at 100%, all 4. She's good, Captain. She's a tough old bird. That she is, Evelyn said, and she reached out and put her hand briefly on the instrument panel in a gesture that was almost not quite something personal. Something between a pilot and the machine that was carrying her alive through a situation that should not have been survivable. Something that she would never have done when she flew fighters. Because in fighters, you were always in control, and control did not require gratitude. But the C-130 was not a fighter. It was not built for this. It was doing this anyway, and that deserved acknowledgement. Dragon 1 is sorting, James Reeves called from the nav station. He's reforming, I can hear it. How many? Evelyn asked. A pause while Reeves listened. Sounds like 8. He's calling 8 elements. 8. 1 had aborted earlier, and now 1 more is gone, Evelyn said. Someone either went bingo fuel pushing hard in the cloud or had a navigation problem. She looked at the math. 8 fighters. 14 minutes until the F-35s arrived. Now she checked the clock, now 11 minutes. "Webb," she said over the interphone. "Ma'am, how are you doing back there?" A short silence. Honest answer. "Always." "I'm scared," he said, "but I'm okay. We're all okay. Dante is quiet, but he's okay. Reeves is talking numbers, which means he's okay. Tara is Tara." "Good," she said, "because I need 11 more minutes from all of you." 11 minutes. Can you give me 11 minutes? "We can give you 11 hours if you can keep flying like this," Webb said, and there was something in it, the echo of the easy grin, the first hint of it coming back, that hit her somewhere she hadn't expected. She pressed her transmit button twice without speaking. The crew understood. It meant received. It meant thank you. It meant hold on. Dragon 1 came out of the cloud deck with his reformed 8, sordid and angry, and no longer underestimating the aircraft in front of him. His voice on the formation frequency was harder now, stripped of its earlier confidence, replaced with something more dangerous. The voice of a skilled pilot who is also a proud man and who is currently very, very angry. "Target is south range 30 miles maneuvering. All elements, this ends now. Formation spreads sequential launch. Do not allow it to gain the cloud deck again. We finish this." 8J-20S turned south at maximum military power. And Evelyn Carter, who had been listening and calculating and waiting for exactly this moment, turned to Danny Cho and said the thing that she had been building toward through all of it. The one remaining move. The one piece of the geometry that she had been protecting like a last card. "Call the F-35s directly," she said. "I thought only AWACS was supposed to." "Call them directly. Guard frequency. Now. Tell them I have 8 bandits consolidated single-axis attack coming south at maximum speed. Tell them the vector." He was already reaching for the frequency selector. "And then what?" "And then," she said, "tell them what we're going to do." "What are we going to do?" "Buddy," she told him. Danny Cho was quiet for exactly 4 seconds. Then he picked up the radio and called the F-35 flight leader on the guard frequency, and his voice was steady. And the words he said were the words she had given him. And when he finished speaking, there was a pause on the other end of the frequency that felt like the pause of someone revising what they thought they knew about the situation they were flying into. Then a woman's voice came back, clipped, professional, but with an edge underneath it that Evelyn recognized, the edge of someone who has just been handed a tactical picture that is far more complex and far more interesting than the one they were briefed on. "Cargo 77, this is Sabre 1. A beat. We copy your plan. Can you actually execute it?" Evelyn reached over and took the radio from Danny. "Sabre 1, this is 77 actual." She paused. "Yes, I can execute it." Another pause, shorter this time. "Then we'll be there 77. Sabre 1 flight is inbound. Keep them busy." Evelyn set the radio down, looked at the radar. 8 fast-moving contacts converging. 11 miles of separation and closing fast. The clock in her head said 9 minutes until the F-35s could make the intercept geometry work. 9 minutes against 8J-20 in a C-130. She had spent her entire career learning that the difference between possible and impossible was mostly a question of whether you were willing to be the kind of person who found out. She was that person. She had always been that person. She had just forgotten for 4 years that being that person was still what she was. The 8 contacts on her radar screen were now close enough that she could see the geometry of their attack pattern forming with perfect, cold clarity. Dragon 1 had learned from every previous engagement. He had eliminated the mistakes. He had built something tight and coordinated and theoretically unbeatable. She looked at it the way a chess player looks at a board that appears to have no moves left in it, and she found the move. "Danny," she said, "increase power to max continuous on all 4. He did it. "Captain, at this power setting and this altitude, our fuel endurance is, I know, Ashiam, I know," she said. "We only need 9 more minutes." "You said 8. She almost smiled. 8.5. The Squan 3. Oh, climb turning, building energy in the way that only a very specific kind of mind could think to build it in this specific aircraft, in this specific moment. And my 8J-20S adjusted their attack geometry to account for it. And Dragon 1, who was good and angry and proud and fully committed, gave his attack order, and the sky above the Philippine Sea became the most consequential piece of airspace in the theater, and Evelyn Carter flew. She flew like everything she had ever been, and that was enough. Dragon 1's attack order went out at 2 hours and 31 minutes into the flight, and what followed happened so fast that Rodriguez on the AWACS would later spend 3 hours with the recorded radar data trying to reconstruct the sequence in an order that made sense and would conclude finally that it did make sense. It just required understanding that the C-130 in the picture was not behaving according to any known transport aircraft doctrine. And once you accepted that, once you stopped trying to fit what you were seeing into a category, it did not belong to the geometry became clear. It became, in fact, beautiful, in the cold, precise way that very dangerous things sometimes are. Dragon 1 launched first, a single missile leading the sequential attack designed to force evasion and fix the target's energy state for the follow-on shots. It was a clean launch. Textbook. The missile came off the rail with perfect geometry and immediately acquired the C-1300's thermal signature and began its intercept calculation, and in the AWACS tactical display, it showed as a small, fast-moving symbol, chasing a large, slow-moving symbol, and the math looked by every standard metric, completely one-sided. Evelyn felt the missile tone change in her warning system, the transition from search to track to launch, and something in her body responded before her conscious mind had fully processed the data. Her hands moved. The C-130 moved. The two things happened as one thing the way they do only in pilots who have spent enough time under threat, that the response has been burned below the level of thought, entirely past cognition, into the place where the body simply knows. She did not run from the missile. She turned into it. Not directly, not suicidally, but at an angle that closed the geometry in a specific way, a way that changed the missile's required intercept calculation in the middle of its terminal phase, forcing it to steepen its pursuit curve at the exact moment when its fuel state was least able to accommodate the maneuver. It was called a notch maneuver technically, though. In fighters, you used it against radar-guided weapons. Against an infrared-guided missile, it required a different execution. A tighter timing, sir, a commitment to the turn that left no margin for hesitation, because hesitation at this point in the geometry was indistinguishable from dying. She did not hesitate. The missile adjusted. It was a good missile, the latest generation built by people who understood that adversaries would try exactly these kinds of counters. It adjusted and reacquired and closed the final 2 kilometers in less than 4 seconds. And in those 4 seconds, Evelyn dispensed chaff and flares from the C-130's defensive systems in a pattern that she had designed in her head based on the missile's behavioral profile from classified briefings she had attended 7 years ago, when she was still the kind of pilot who attended classified briefings about the behavioral profiles of threats. The missile went for the flare, not clean, not perfectly. It went for the flare the way a dog goes for a thrown stick when it's not entirely convinced the stick is the real target with a slight hesitation, a fractional tracking anomaly that cost it the clean kill and gave it instead a detonation 40 meters off the C-130's right side that hit the number 3 engine with shrapnel and killed it in approximately 1.5 seconds. The airframe shuddered, hard, the kind of hard that transmits through everything, through the seats and the floors and the bulkheads and the cargo straps and the bodies of every person aboard, with a language that is not words, but is absolutely clear. Marcus Webb heard the engine note change and knew immediately what had happened without needing to be told. Tara Okonkwo was already on the engine fire suppression checklist before the vibration had stopped. James Reeves grabbed his console with both hands and held on. Yusuf Dantes pressed the photograph against his chest. "Engine 3, Tara called out, her voice carrying that particular quality of extreme competence. Under pressure, the quality of someone doing the thing they were trained to do, regardless of the conditions under which they are being asked to do it. Firelight, suppressing, feathering. "Copy," Evelyn said. 3 engines. The C-130 could fly on 3 engines. She had done it in training. She ran the performance numbers in her head in approximately 2 seconds. Power, available drag, increase. Turn performance, degradation, speed reduction. Numbers. Manageable numbers, but smaller than before, and smaller numbers meant smaller margins. And smaller margins meant less room for the kind of flying she needed to do for the next 8 minutes. "Webb," she called. "Still here, ma'am." His voice was tight but clear. "Anybody hurt back there?" "Checking." A pause. She could hear him moving, hear him running down the cargo hold, hear the quick exchanges with Dante and Reeves. No, we're all okay. Some things came loose from the shrapnel hit. Equipment, nobody's hit. Good, stay strapped. Danny was staring at the engine's performance display with the expression of someone doing mental arithmetic about their odds. We lost about 18% of our total thrust, he said. 17.4, she corrected, without looking up from what she was doing, which was flying the airplane and watching the radar and calculating the next 60 seconds of geometry simultaneously. It's manageable. Dragon 1 is resetting, James Reeves called from Nav. He knows the first missile only wounded us. He's regrouping the formation. How long? 40 seconds, maybe. He's good, Captain. He reorganizes fast. I know, she said. That's why we need to use the 40 seconds. She called the F-35 frequency. Sabre 177. Status. The woman's voice, Major Sarah Bennett Sabre. One flight leader came back immediately and clearly. 77 Sabre 1. We are 5 minutes out. I have your picture. You took a hit. Engine 3. Bird still flying. 8 bandits reformed 40 seconds to next attack. What's your approach, Vector? Coming in from the northeast at altitude. We'll have a top cover geometry if you can keep the bandits below 25,000. Evelyn looked at her radar. The 8 J-20s were currently at 28,000 feet coming down into their attack profile. I can keep them below 25, she said. I need you to trust me on the how. A half-second pause. Bennett's voice 7-7. After what I've watched on this radar for the last 20 minutes, I'll trust you on pretty much anything. What do you need? Stay northeast. Don't enter the fight until I call you. When I call you, come in fast and come in low. I'll have them extended and energy depleted on the south end of the engagement. They won't see you until it's too late. Another pause. Longer. 7-7, that means you're baiting them for 5 more minutes with 1 engine. That's correct. Bennett was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. Then copy 7-7. We'll be there. Don't get killed before we arrive. Doing my best, Sabre 1. She clicked off and turned back to the threat display where Dragon 1's formation was completing its reset with the speed and precision of a very angry, very capable man who had made up his mind that this engagement ended in the next 3 minutes. He's not going to be subtle this time, Danny said. No, she agreed. He's done being subtle. He's going to come straight at us with everything. And we're going to give him exactly what he wants, she said. We're going to look vulnerable. We're going to look like a 3-engine cargo plane that just took a hit and is trying to run. Danny thought about that. And actually, we're going to be exactly where we need to be when the F-35s arrive. She turned the C-130 south and reduced power slightly. Not enough to be a real performance change, but enough to look like one, enough to look like a damaged aircraft that was trying to stretch its remaining performance to survive because Dragon 1 was watching his radar picture, and Dragon 1 needed to believe he was close to finished with this. The formation of 8 J-20s turned south and accelerated. Dragon 1's voice on the formation frequency carried the concentrated energy of a man who has moved past anger into pure professional focus, the kind that is in its own way more dangerous than anger because it does not make mistakes born of emotion. Target has damage. 3-engine performance. We close and finish this. Sequential launch, 2-second intervals, all 8 aircraft. Cover all escape vectors. Nothing survives this pass. 8 fighter jets, 1 pass, 16 missiles in staggered sequence. The math was stark. In the cargo hold, Marcus Webb heard the change in the engine note and felt the difference in the aircraft's behavior, slightly heavier, slightly less responsive. The subtle asymmetry of 3 engines instead of 4. And he sat in his seat and put his hands flat on his knees deliberately, the way his grandmother had taught him to sit when he was anxious as a child, and he focused on breathing, and he thought about the captain up front, about the woman who had just flown them through the impossible twice already, about the way her voice sounded on the interphone, steady, specific, never loud, never uncertain. And he decided sitting in the cargo hold of a wounded aircraft that if she said they were going to be okay, he was going to believe her. He had no other good options, but it was also genuinely what he believed. James, he said on the interphone. Reeves looked up from his console. Yeah. When this is over, Webb said, I'm buying you the most expensive beer I can find. A pause. Then Reeves laughed. It was not a long laugh or a full laugh, but it was real and it cut through the tension in the cargo hold. The way that real things sometimes cut through the things we construct to hold ourselves together in the bad moments. And Dantes looked up from his photograph, and Tara Okonkwo heard it through her headset and shook her head in what was either disbelief or affection or both. One beer, Reeves said. I'm cheap. One beer, Webb confirmed, but it's going to be a really, really good one. Dragon 1 was 2 minutes out. His formation was tight professional, exactly where he wanted it, and the target was ahead of him at the range and altitude and energy state he had calculated, and everything in his tactical picture said that this was the kill shot. Everything said this was over. Everything except one small detail that his radar could not show him, because it was not a radar detectable thing. It was a decision made by a woman he had never met in a cockpit he had never seen at a moment he did not know was coming. Evelyn keyed the crew interphone. All stations, Captain. 30 seconds to the next attack. I want everyone to understand something. A beat, just one. We are going to make it through this, all of us. I need you to hold on for 30 more seconds and then it changes. You have been extraordinary. Every single one of you. Now hold on. She clicked off, turned to Danny. Maximum power on 1, 2, and 4. Full power now. He pushed the throttles forward. The 3 remaining engines surged. The C-130, already low and fast by its standards, began to climb at an angle that was once again not standard for a C. 130, not expected, not within the parameters that Dragon 1's fire control computer had been calculating against. Dragon 1 saw the target's radar return begin to climb, and his finger was already moving, and he made the call that he had been building to for the last 23 minutes. All elements launch sequence begin. The first missile came off Dragon 2's rail, the second off Dragon 3's 2 seconds later, then Dragon 5, then Dragon 6. A continuous, staggered, mathematically comprehensive sequence of destruction aimed at a single point in space where the target was projected to be. Where the target was projected to be. Not where it was. Evelyn had already moved, not far, not dramatically. She did not have the performance to be dramatic anymore. But she had done something that Dragon 1, in all his correct, professional, well-trained tactical thinking, had not fully accounted for. She had used the climb to change the three-dimensional geometry of the intercept in the one way that all 8 attacking aircraft had to adjust for simultaneously. Adjusting simultaneously from 8 different positions with 2-second launch intervals that were now out of sync with the target's actual position in an engagement where the first missile's miss would corrupt the intercept solution of every subsequent missile in the sequence. That was the problem she had given them, and it was the right problem to give them. The first missile, Dragon 2's, chased the original intercept point at and found empty air in proximity, detonated 60 meters below and behind the C-1300's new position. The pressure wave hit hard. The airframe rang, but they were flying. The second missile reacquired, but it had to steepen its pursuit angle in the terminal phase and reach the limits of its maneuverability 100 meters from the aircraft and detonated there. And the shrapnel from that one hit the tail section and took out one of the control surfaces. And suddenly the C-130 was not just 3-engine, it was 3-engine and partially control impaired. And Danny Cho heard the change in the aircraft's handling immediately because he was a good pilot with good hands, and good hands feel things. We lost something in the tail, he said. Left elevator, Evelyn said, and she had already adjusted her inputs, had already found the new control. Harmony of the damaged aircraft, the way a musician finds a key change without having to consciously think about it, because this was the thing she was beneath everything else at the most fundamental level. She was a pilot, and a pilot does not stop flying. The third missile lost track entirely in the chaff cloud she dispensed at the precise moment she had calculated based on its approach angle that the cloud would be most effective. It detonated 200 meters away. Still close, but away. Missiles 4 through 8 were operating with degraded intercept solutions because the target's position and energy state were no longer consistent with the launch parameters, and 4 of them missed, and 1 Dragon 7's came close enough that the proximity fuse detonated, and the blast took out the number 2 engine. 2 engines. They were down to 2 engines. Engine 2's, Tara said, and her voice had a quality in it now that was not quite fear, but was the voice of someone who has been doing their job perfectly and is watching the situation degrade past the point where doing their job perfectly is enough. Firelight suppressing, Captain 2 engines. We are at 2 engines. The C-130 on 2 engines at the altitude and speed they were at was not the same aircraft. It was an aircraft that could still fly barely in the right hands, but that had lost most of its performance margin. And performance margin was the only currency Evelyn had been trading in this entire fight. The radar warning system was screaming. Dragon 1 was repositioning for a follow-on attack, and he was close now. Close enough that Evelyn could see his radar interrogation of her aircraft as something almost personal, the electronic equivalent of a hand reaching out to confirm that what you're looking at is really there. She was at 3 minutes and 20 seconds until the F-35s could make the geometry work. 3 minutes and 20 seconds, 2 engines, partial control, authority, and pitch, 8 fighters reforming. Danny Cho looked at the instrument panel and looked at her and did not say anything for a moment. Then he said quietly the thing that was true, "This is very bad." "Yes," she said. "Can we make 3 more minutes?" She looked at her systems, at her performance envelope, at the threat display. She ran the numbers the way she had been running numbers since the moment the contacts appeared on her radar, the fast mental arithmetic of a pilot who has spent a career turning mathematics into survival. "Yes," she said. "How?" "By being exactly this," she said. "By not panicking. By flying the airplane we have, not the one we wish we had." She keyed the formation frequency not to transmit, but to listen. And Dragon 1's voice came through with a quality that had changed again. He had made the damage assessment. He could see from his radar picture and his wingman's reports that the target had lost 2 engines, had lost control. Surface performance was flying in a box that was getting smaller by the second. His voice had shed even the anger now. What was left was something almost careful. The voice of a man who is very close to completing something and wants to complete it correctly. "Target is critically damaged," Dragon 1 said. 2 engines, we have time. We make sure of it this time. Formation, we do this right." And that word time was the mistake. Not a tactical mistake, a psychological one. Because Dragon 1 in that moment believed he had time, and the belief that you have time is the thing that makes you slightly less watchful, slightly less urgent, slightly more procedural. And procedural was not fast enough. Sabre 177, Evelyn's voice on the F-35 frequency steady as a road. "Bandits are resetting. They think they have time. They don't. How close are you?" Bennett's voice came back with a sharpness that said she had been tracking every second. 2 minutes 40. We are pushing. 240 is enough, Evelyn said. "Listen, Dragon 1 is going to come in high and slow. This time he thinks he can take his time and be precise. He'll be at 23 to 24,000 reduced speed for accuracy. That's exactly the geometry you want." A pause. 7-7, are you telling me what firing solution I should use? "I'm telling you what he's going to give you," Evelyn said. "What you do with it is your call, Sabre 1. A beat. Then Bennett's voice came back with something in it that was not quite laughter, but was adjacent to it, the sound of a pilot who has just had the situation explained to her by someone who understood it better than she did and who was honest enough to admit it. "Copy 7-7. We'll be there." In the cargo hold, the silence had settled into something that was almost its own kind of sound. Marcus Webb was sitting with his eyes closed. Not because he was praying, though he wasn't entirely sure there was a difference. Yusuf Dante had folded the photograph back into his pocket and was sitting with his hands gripping his knees, staring at the ceiling with the focused intensity of a young man who has decided that if he is very still and very deliberate, the universe might take note of the seriousness of his intention to survive. James Reeves was watching his instruments with the automatic repetitive focus of a man who needs something to do with his mind and has decided that doing his job is the thing. And Tara Okonkwo at the engineer station was running the numbers on their remaining performance, quietly without being asked, and she did not share what those numbers said because the time for that information was not now. And she had been in this cockpit long enough to understand that there were moments when the most important skill a crew member possessed was knowing what not to say. Dragon 1's formation was at 23,000 feet and coming in slow and deliberate, exactly as Evelyn had predicted. And Dragon 1's voice was giving the attack order with the careful precision of a man who is not going to miss this time. And Sabre 1 and Sabre 2 and Sabre 3 and Sabre 4. The four F-35 Lightning IIs out of Kadena Air Base came over the horizon from the northeast at 45,000 feet and began their descent, targeting solutions already locked before Dragon 1's formation had any reason to look in their direction. Bennett keyed the tactical frequency. All Sabre elements picture clear. Tally on 8 bandits. Commit. Commit. Dragon 1 heard it at almost the same moment his radar warning receiver lit up with the very specific, very alarming tone of an F-35's targeting radar, achieving a solid lock from an unexpected direction. He had less than 4 seconds to process that information, recognize what it meant, understand that the cargo aircraft had been holding his formation in exactly the geometry that made them vulnerable to an attack from altitude, and formulate a response. He needed approximately 12 seconds for that sequence. Sabre elements Fox 3, Bennett called, and 4 AIM-1, 2, missiles came off their rails in a smooth, almost casual sequence, and Dragon 1's voice erupted on the formation frequency with the urgency of a man who has in one crystalline moment understood everything that happened in the previous 25 minutes, and understood it too late. Break it, he called. All elements break now. Missiles inbound from break, break, break. 2 of the missiles found their targets before the formation could complete the break maneuver. Dragon 7 and Dragon 08 on the inside of the turn did not have the energy to break hard enough fast enough. They came apart in quick succession, and the remaining 6 J-20S scattered, not in a coordinated defensive formation, but in the scattered individual self-preservation break of a group of pilots who have been surprised at a fundamental level and are now operating on instinct alone. An instinct, when it scatters, a formation creates a chaos that the F-35s were already positioned to exploit. Evelyn heard the radar warning receiver's character change. From the scream of imminent threat to the fragmented, confused chirping of sensors searching without direction. She heard Dragon 1's voice transition from control to urgency to something that was unmistakably the voice of a man whose tactical picture has just been inverted. "They're breaking," Danny said. He was watching the radar display, and his voice had a quality in it that was new, not relief, not yet, but the first cousin of it. The quality of a man who can see the edge of something from where he's standing. "They're scattering." "Yes," she said, and she kept flying. Because the airplane was still damaged, and the fight was not over, and she was still the captain of a crew that needed to get home, and the job was not done until the wheels were on the ground, and everybody on board had walked away from it. That was the job. Not the tactics, not the missiles, not the geometry. The job was the people in this aircraft, and the bomb was not done. "Sabre 177, she called. "Status. 77 Sabre 1. Bennett's voice had shed its clipped professionalism for something more immediate. She sounded like a pilot who was in the middle of a real fight, which she was. 2 kills. Formation scattered. We're running down the stragglers. You have breathing room. How bad are you?" Evelyn looked at her instruments. 2 engines. Partial pitch authority. Fuel state adequate. Structural integrity. She had no way to be completely certain, but the aircraft was flying, and flying aircraft are structures that are adequate. "We're up," she said. "We can make it home." "That's the best damn thing I've heard today," Bennett said. "Then 77, whoever you are up there, we are going to need to talk when this is over." "Any time," Evelyn said. "Sabre 1, be advised, Dragon 1 is still out there. He's good. Don't underestimate him." "Copy," Bennett said, and her voice had shifted into the absolute focus of a pilot who has just been given specific, credible information about a credible threat. "We see him. He's trying to regroup." "He won't," Evelyn said. "He knows it's over, but he's proud. He'll make one more run before he goes." A short pause. "How do you know that?" Evelyn considered the question. How did she know? Because she had spent 10 years flying with pilots like Dragon 1, training against pilots, like Dragon 1, being evaluated by pilots, like Dragon 1. Because she understood in a way that was almost intimate the psychology of a very skilled pilot who has been beaten by something that should not have been able to beat him. Because pride and skill in the same person at the edge of a losing fight always does the same thing. "Because it's what I would do," she said. And she was right. Dragon 1 came in one more time, solo, without his formation, without a coordinated attack plan. He came in because he was who he was, a 14-year veteran, a skilled and proud man, and because the alternative was turning away from an unarmed cargo aircraft and living with what that meant. He came in and Sabre 2 was waiting for him at the altitude he had to approach from, and the engagement lasted 11 seconds. And Dragon 1's aircraft was not destroyed. The missile proximity detonated close enough to damage his systems and force an immediate abort, but he was going home. He was going home without the kill. He was going home with a picture in his head that he was going to spend a very long time trying to understand. The remaining 5 J-20S were already retreating, pursued but not caught, the F-35S running them to the edge of engagement range before breaking off. The sky above the Philippine Sea was becoming quiet in the way that skies become quiet after very loud things. Not peaceful, not yet, but no longer hostile. All stations, Evelyn said on the crew interphone, and her voice was steady, and if there was something underneath the steadiness, something that was only now beginning to come to the surface after 26 minutes of holding it down with both hands, she did not let it be audible because that was not what this moment was for. Threat is neutralized. We are going home. 2 engines, some structural damage, but we are airworthy and we are going home. A pause. Somebody want to get me a fuel state? Tara's voice came back almost immediately, and there was something in it, the barest, smallest breath of something that was not quite a T and not quite laughter, and was in fact the sound of a very competent person allowing themselves for just one instant to feel the full weight of what had just happened before putting it away and going back to work. Fuel state is, she ran the numbers. We can make Echo Base with 30 minutes of reserves. It's going to be close. Close is enough, Evelyn said. Close is what we have. Danny Cho had been quiet for almost a minute. He had been doing his instruments and his checklists and his job because that was the kind of pilot he was, and because doing those things had given his hands something to do while the rest of him caught up with the reality of where he was and what he had just been part of. He looked at Evelyn. She was flying the airplane, just flying it the way she always flew it, with those small, precise inputs with that attention that was its own kind of language. But something was different now. Something had come to the surface of her face that was not usually there. Not pride, not relief, something quieter than both. Something that looked, if he had to put a word to it, like grief. Captain, he said. She looked over at him. He did not know what to say clearly, so he said the thing that was simply and completely true. Thank you. She looked at him for a moment, then she looked back at the instruments, and she said nothing. And that was all right, because some things are too large for the words that exist, and the airplane still needed to be flown. Marcus Webb's voice on the interphone and the easy grin was back in it now. Not forced, not performed, genuinely back. Ma'am, I just want to say for the record that I have had many interesting flights in my career, and this was by a very significant margin the most interesting one. Noted, Webb, she said. Also for the record, I am never complaining about a boring flight again. Also noted. And also, and I mean this sincerely, you are the most terrifying pilot I have ever met in my entire life. She almost smiled. It was small. It was private. It belonged to a very specific place in Ma and her, a place she had kept locked for 4 years. And it came to the surface now, not because she let it, but because it was stronger than the lock. Let's go home, she said. And she turned the 2-engine tail-damaged, fuselage-riddled C-130 toward Echo Base, and she flew. The radio calls started coming in before they had crossed back over Philippine territorial airspace. First, it was Rodriguez on the AWACS frequency, and his voice had shed every trace of the professional flatness he had maintained through the engagement, and was now simply the voice of a man who needed to say something human. Cargo 77 Sentinel, we have you on radar. Glad to see that return. Very glad. Good to be seen, Sentinel, Evelyn said. Then it was the duty officer at Echo Base Operations, a colonel named Hartwell, who Evelyn had met twice and remembered as a careful, precise man who chose his words the way a watchmaker chooses parts. He came on the frequency and said in a voice that was careful and precise, and also underneath both of those things visibly shaken. 77, this is Echo Base. We have your picture. Emergency services are standing by. What is your status? Evelyn ran through it cleanly. Echo Base 77, 2 engines 1 and 4 operational. Tail control surface, damage, partial pitch authority, remaining. Fuselage, structural integrity assessed as adequate for landing. Fuel state sufficient for 1 approach, no go-around available. 6 crew, no casualties. Request straight-in approach to runway 27 emergency equipment on standby. A pause. In that pause, Evelyn could hear Hartwell processing the information, organizing it, fitting it into categories. Then 77 copy all. Runway 27 is yours. Wind is 270 at 12 knots. Emergency services in position. Is there anything else you need? She thought about that for a moment. Actually thought about it, which was not something she always did when controllers asked that question, because usually the answer was simply no. Tell your crash crews the aircraft has battle damage of unknown extent to the lower fuselage, she said. Have foam available, and tell them not to crowd the runway. I'm going to need the full length. Understood 77, full-length foam available. You are cleared for straight-in approach runway 27. Emergency declared. She clicked off and looked at her fuel gauges and her engine instruments and her airspeed and the numbers that the aircraft was giving her, and she built the approach in her head the way she built everything methodically, specifically without drama, treating each constraint as simply a condition to be incorporated rather than an obstacle to be feared. 2 engines, partial pitch, no go-around, 1 shot. She had landed damaged aircraft before. Not this damaged, but damaged in training and exercises twice in her combat career in aircraft that were not the C-130. The principles were the same. Fly the airplane you have. Don't wish for the airplane you want. Keep the speed up until you can afford to let it go. Commit to the landing. Do not pull up. Danny, she said, here. You have the checklist for 2-engine approach and landing. Already on it. He had been on it, she realized, for the last several minutes. The checklist was open on his knee, the items being ticked off with his pen in a sequence that was slightly faster than normal, but no less precise. He had been doing his job because that was who he was. Talk me through hydraulics, she said. Primary hydraulic system is degraded. We lost fluid from the number 2 engine-driven pump when we took the hit. Backup system is holding. Brake pressure is adequate. Steering is reduced, but functional. Flaps, we have partial flaps available, not full. How partial? 20 degrees. Full would be 35. She worked that into the approach picture. 20 degrees of flap meant a faster approach speed, which meant a longer ground roll, which was why she had asked for the full runway length. A hooded threshold. At this weight, 20 degrees flap, 2 engines, recommend 150 knots, indicated minimum. I'll fly 155, she said. Gives us a buffer. That's going to be a long landing roll. We have 8,000 feet. It's enough. In the cargo hold, James Reeves had briefed the others on the situation with the specific level voice clarity of a man who believed that people deserved to know what was happening to them, especially when what was happening was serious. He had explained the engine situation, the control damage, the fuel state, the single approach only constraint. Marcus Webb had listened to all of it and then said, so what you're saying is she has to stick the landing on the first try or we're out of options. That's what I'm saying. A brief silence. Then Webb said, she'll stick it. Reeves looked at him. You sound very certain. I am, Webb said. And he was. He did not fully understand why he was, except that it had something to do with the last 40 minutes and the way a person who does impossible things tends to keep doing them until the situation no longer requires it. She'll stick it, he said again. Brace position on her call. Make sure Dante knows the drill. Yusuf Dantes knew the drill. He had been reviewing the emergency brace procedure in his head for the last 20 minutes, partly because it gave his mind something to do, and partly because it was the right thing to be doing. And he was a person who under pressure defaulted to doing the right thing. I know the drill, he said quietly. Good man, Webb said. The approach to Echo Base began 40 miles out when Evelyn started her gradual, careful descent. The C-130 on 2 engines had a different character than the aircraft she had launched in that morning. Heavier in her responses, less forgiving with a slight yaw tendency from the asymmetric thrust that required constant correction and would require more correction as the speed came back on final approach. She flew it with both hands for the first time in the entire flight. Up until now, she had been flying primarily with one hand, the other managing systems or gesturing over the displays. Now both hands were on the controls because the airplane needed both, and she gave it both without ceremony. Danny was cross-checking everything: fuel, hydraulics, flap position, engine instruments. He was calling numbers at her with a rhythm that had become over the last hour something close to a language between them, she asked. He answered, and the answers were always there before she had fully finished asking. He was running on something beyond normal alertness now. They both were. The thing that the body does when it has been asked to operate at its limit for an extended period, when the adrenaline has become its own kind of fuel. 20 miles, he said. Gear down. Not yet. Hold gear until 10 miles. Keep the drag off as long as possible. Copy. The base came onto the radio again. Hartwell's voice. 7-7 Echo Base. We have you on radar 22 miles. Emergency equipment is in position. Wines holding 270 at 12. Runway is clear. You are number 1, no traffic. Copy Echo Base, Evelyn said. 7-7 has the field. She did not have the field yet. She would not have the field until the wheels were on the ground and the aircraft had stopped. But she said it the way pilots say it, as a statement of intent and capability, and she meant it the way pilots mean it, not as certainty about the outcome, but as commitment to the execution. 10 miles. Gear down, she said. Danny extended the landing gear. The hydraulic system groaned slightly, an unusual sound, the sound of a system doing its job with less margin than it was designed to operate at. But 3 green lights came on the indicator, and the gear locked down, and Evelyn felt the drag increase and adjusted her power accordingly. 2 engines. Gear down. 20 degrees of flap. Gear down and locked, Danny confirmed. 3 green, flaps at 20, speed is 160 and coming back. Call me every 5 knots. 155, he said almost immediately. She was feeling the airplane's handling very carefully now. The way it was responding to the controls, the way the yaw tendency was changing as the speed decreased, the way the partial pitch authority was going to affect her ability to arrest the descent rate in the flare. She was building a model of it in real time, updating it with every input and response, because the landing was going to happen in approximately 4 minutes, and when it happened, it was going to have to happen correctly the first time. 150, Danny said, 6 miles. She could see the runway lights through the windscreen, the long double row of white and the red threshold lights, and the approach lighting system strobing in the afternoon light, giving the runway a visual identity that her eyes and hands were already translating into geometry. Sabre 177, she called on the tactical frequency that she had not yet cleared. She did not know why she called, perhaps because something about arriving at this moment alone, without the people who had been part of what it took to get here, felt incomplete. Bennett's voice came back almost instantly. 7-7 Sabre 1, we're with you. We have your 6. Your... Evelyn looked up and slightly behind. Not that she could see them, but she looked anyway. Thank you, Bennett, she said. It was the first time she had used the woman's name rather than her call sign. A brief pause. Landed Carter, Bennett said. And in Bennett's voice was the voice of one fighter pilot speaking to another across whatever gap of aircraft type and situation and history existed between them, with the precise and unadorned respect of the profession. Land it and walk away. That's the plan, Evelyn said. 4 miles, 145, Danny said, and there was a warning in it. Power coming up lately, she said, and advanced the throttles on engines 1 and 4 with the delicacy of someone adjusting the tension on a very fine instrument. The speed stabilized at 150. Call the glide slope. On glide slope, on center line, speed 150. Looking good, Captain. He paused. You've got this. She did not answer. She was flying. 3 miles. The runway was filling the windscreen now. The way runways do when you are close and committed, when the decision to land is no longer a decision, but simply a consequence of physics and intention combined. The approach lighting was strobing. The threshold lights were red and solid. 2 miles. 148, Danny said. Glide slope slightly high. She adjusted. The aircraft settled back onto the glide slope with the small, clean correction of a pilot who has very little room for error and is not wasting any of it. 1 mile. The threshold was close. She could see the runway numbers 27 painted large and white on the asphalt, and the numbers were coming toward her at the speed of a committed approach in a heavy, partially damaged aircraft on 2 engines with partial control authority and 1 chance. She did not think about any of that. She thought about the airplane. She thought about the geometry of the flare, when to begin it, how much pitch change to ask for given the reduced authority, what the sink rate would do if she timed it wrong. She thought about the numbers Danny had given her and the numbers the instruments were giving her and the numbers that her hands were giving her through the controls, and she put all of those numbers together into one action. Threshold, Danny said. She began the flare. The Squan-3 resisted not dramatically, not catastrophically, but with the honest resistance of an aircraft that has been damaged and is being asked to do something precise, telling her through the controls that it can do this, but that she is going to have to work for it. She worked for it. She increased the back pressure on the controls by exactly the amount that the aircraft's response told her was correct, not by the amount the checklist said or the amount that had worked in normal circumstances, by the amount that this aircraft in this condition on this specific approach was telling her was right. The main gear touched at 147 knots, 20 feet past the threshold on the centerline. Firm, clean, both mains simultaneously, which was the right way to land a heavy aircraft with partial pitch authority. Not a grease job, not the landing you do when everything is working and you want to look good, but the landing you do when everything matters and you need it to work. She held the nose up. Let the speed come back. Let the aerodynamics help slow the aircraft before she put the nose wheel down, because with degraded brakes and a long ground roll, she needed every method of deceleration she had in the right sequence. Nose down. Thrust reversers on engines 1 and 4. The lever coming back and the engines howling in reverse and the deceleration pushing everyone forward against their harnesses with a force that was after everything else almost gentle by comparison. Brakes controlled. Not full application, not yet, not while the speed was high, and then more as the speed came back and the end of the runway was still ahead, but was no longer rushing toward them with the urgency of a problem, was instead simply approaching at a manageable rate. The aircraft stopped with 2,000 feet of runway remaining. For approximately 3 seconds, nobody said anything. The engines wound down through the reverser range. The outside world, which had been absent for 31 minutes, came back the sound of aircraft crash trucks, moving radio calls from the tower, the sound of the base. Then Marcus Webb's voice on the interphone, and it was not his easy grin voice or his tight under-pressure voice. It was a voice that she had not heard from him before. Something quiet and real and very young. "We're down," he said. "We're down," she confirmed. And then he said nothing else for a moment. None of them did. They just existed in the stillness of it, in the enormous, almost unbearable simplicity of being alive, and stopped and on the ground, which is the thing that seems obvious until it isn't. The emergency vehicles reached them as they cleared the runway onto the taxiway. Evelyn shut down the remaining 2 engines on the taxiway at the direction of the crash crews, who were not taking chances with an aircraft of unknown structural integrity. They were towed the final 300 meters to the parking apron. When the aircraft stopped and the crew door opened and the smell of outside air came in, the particular smell of a Pacific Air Base fuel and salt and concrete heat, Marcus Webb stood up from his seat and put his hands on his knees and took 3 long, deliberate breaths. And then he straightened up and looked at the others and said with the return of the easy grin, not performed, genuinely returned, "Okay, everybody, okay." Dantes nodded. Once. The photograph was in his hand. Reeves was already gathering his navigation materials with the habitual tidiness of a man for whom procedure is comfort. Tara Okonkwo was standing at the engineer station running through her shutdown checklist with the focus of someone who intends to complete every item, regardless of external circumstances. "Tara," Webb said. "Almost done," she said without looking up. "Tara," she looked up. "We made it." She looked at him for a moment. Her jaw was very tight and her eyes were very bright, and she said with the precision of a woman who is keeping herself together by sheer force of practiced will, "I know. Give me 30 seconds to finish my checklist." He gave her 30 seconds. In the cockpit, Evelyn was going through her own shutdown sequence. Danny was doing the same item by item, the 2 of them working through the list with the quiet synchrony of a crew that has been through something together that changes how you understand another person. When the last item was done, Danny set his checklist on the console and sat back in his seat and looked at the instrument panel for a moment as if he was saying goodbye to it. Then he turned to Evelyn. "I'm going to need you to explain some things," he said. "I know," she said. "Not right now, but..." "Not right now," she agreed. She reached out and touched the instrument panel again. The same gesture as before, brief, private, almost too small to notice. Then she unstrapped her harness and stood up, and she was the captain again, getting her crew off the aircraft, which was the job. The crew assembled at the bottom of the entry stairs and stood on the concrete of Echo Base in the afternoon light. And for a moment, they were just 6 people standing together, not saying anything, doing the human thing that people do when they have been through something that is too large for immediate words. Webb was looking at the aircraft, at the damage. He walked around the nose slowly and stopped when he could see the tail section, and the expression on his face changed to something specific and serious. The tail was bad. Not catastrophic, the aircraft had gotten them home, which was the proof, but visibly significantly bad. The control surface damage from the second missile near miss had taken a section of the left elevator and most of its actuating hardware. The fuselage aft of the wing had shrapnel punctures across an area larger than Webb would have estimated from inside. The number 3 engine nacelle had a quality about it that suggested the fire suppression system had done its job, which meant the fire had been real. He stood there looking at it, and then he looked at Evelyn, who had come around the nose and was now standing next to him, also looking. "How did we fly home in that?" he said. "Carefully," she said. He laughed, one real short laugh that came out of him like something that had been compressed for a very long time. Colonel Hartwell reached them before the debrief team did, which told Evelyn something about how he had prioritized his afternoon. He was a trim man in his early 50s, gray at his temples, with the bearing of someone who had spent enough years in uniform that it had become structural rather than cosmetic. He looked at the crew one at a time, and then he looked at the aircraft, and then he looked at Evelyn. And the expression on his face was not the expression of a superior officer conducting an administrative assessment. It was the expression of a man confronting something he had not expected. "Captain Carter," he said. "Colonel." "Everybody good?" "All 6, she said. "The airplane took the hits, not the crew." He nodded slow, looked at the aircraft again. "I watched the radar tape," he said. "I watched it twice. I'm going to watch it again tonight." He paused. "I have watched combat radar recordings for 22 years, and I have never seen a transport aircraft do what I watched that aircraft do." Evelyn said nothing. This was not false modesty. It was simply that she did not have a response that would fit the space he had left. "OWAC's data shows 2 enemy aircraft destroyed." Hartwell continued, his voice going into the careful territory of a man stating facts he is still making sense of. 3 more recorded as probable mission kills based on trajectory and non-return status. Dragon 1's aircraft is assessed as damaged but recovered. 3 others returned to their base. He paused again. "The tactics board is going to want everything you can give them. Every decision, every maneuver, every call." "I understand," she said. "The intelligence community is also going to want to talk about the fact that you were monitoring their tactical frequency." "I requested access to the receiver at the start of the mission," she said. "It's in the pre-mission log." "I know," he said, which is one of the things that makes this conversation complicated. He looked at her directly. "Who told you to do that?" "Nobody," she said. "I've always done it on certain mission profiles. It's useful. Transport pilots," Hartwell said carefully, "do not generally know that it would be useful." The moment was here. She had known it was coming since the moment the wheels had touched the runway. She had known it was coming in some sense since the moment the contacts had appeared on her radar, and she had felt something inside her shift from one identity to another, not break, not change, but simply reveal what had always been there. She met Hartwell's eyes. "Colonel, I need to give you a full debrief. Not the standard one, a full one. There are things about my background that are relevant to what happened today." Something moved behind Hartwell's careful eyes. He had been an officer for a long time, and long-term officers learn to recognize the texture of important information before they know its content. He recognized it now. "My office," he said. 1 hour. The crew can debrief with the standard team. You and I are going to have a different conversation." "Yes, sir," she said. Hartwell walked away. Webb had heard the exchange, or enough of it, and he turned to Evelyn with an expression that was somewhere between curiosity and the beginning of a realization. "Ma'am," he said slowly, "just how much are you not what we thought you were?" She looked at him for a moment. "Webb," she said, "you have about an hour before the debrief. Go get something to eat, and find Dante and make sure he calls his family." "How did you know he has family he needs to call?" "Because everyone does," she said. She walked toward the operations building, and Webb watched her go, and Reeves came up beside him, and they both stood there watching, and Reeves said quietly, "I did some math while we were flying." "Yeah. The maneuvers she flew, the specific ones, The cloud deck thing, the fratricide geometry, the terrain masking, those aren't transport pilot survival tactics. No, Webb said. Those are fighter pilot offensive tactics, Reeves said, used defensively by someone who understood them from both sides. Yeah, Webb said. She wasn't flying to survive, Reeves said. She was flying to win. Webb watched her until she went through the door. I know, he said. I figured that out somewhere around the third time I thought we were dead and then weren't. In Hartwell's office 60 minutes later, Evelyn Carter sat across from her commanding officer and told the truth. All of it. She told it the way she did everything without drama, specifically with the details that mattered and without the ones that didn't. She told him about the F-22 program, about the weapons instructor certification, about the classified missions, 7 of them in 4 different theaters, about her performance record, which was where the classified part became very classified indeed. And then she told him about her brother. His name was Thomas. He had been 24 years old and a Marine infantry officer, and he had been killed in an airstrike coordination error in a theater she could not name, in a year she had never spoken about publicly. She had been flying combat air patrol overhead when the error occurred. She had not caused it. There was nothing she could have done to prevent it. The investigation had cleared her completely. None of that had mattered. What mattered was that she had been above, and he had been below, and one morning he had been alive, and by the afternoon he wasn't, and the sky had never quite felt the same to her afterward. Not because she stopped loving it. She had never stopped loving it. But because it had cost her something that she had not agreed to pay, and the currency of that cost had been too personal to keep flying missions where the purpose was to kill. So she had requested transfer to transport. She had buried the record. She had become invisible, and she had told herself for 4 years that she was at peace with it. Hartwell listened to all of it without interrupting, which was one of the things about him that she had not expected and was grateful for. When she finished, he sat with it for a moment. The Air Force has been looking for someone with your specific certification profile for 14 months, he said finally. There's a position. It's not what you'd expect. It's not a return to fighter ops. She waited. It's a training program development role, he said, for transport crews, specifically developing survivability and threat response training for cargo and tanker platforms. He paused. The program director has been trying to argue for years that transport crews need tactical awareness that goes beyond passive evasion. Nobody in the acquisition chain believed it was feasible because nobody in the acquisition chain had data to support it. He looked at her steadily. Today you generated that data. She was quiet for a long time, long enough that Hartwell waited, which he did not always do. Thomas used to say, she said finally, and her voice was steady because she had made her peace with the steadiness, even if she had not made complete peace with everything else. That the best thing a soldier could be was a shield, not a sword. He thought the sword got the glory and the shield saved the lives. She looked at Hartwell. He was right. He was right, Hartwell said. Outside in the early evening light that was beginning to come down over Echo Base, Marcus Webb had found a vending machine and was distributing its contents to the crew with the focused generosity of a man who has decided that sugar and caffeine are the appropriate response to surviving a Tuesday. Yusuf Dante had called his mother. The call had lasted 4 minutes and he had not said much. He had said he was fine. He had said the mission went okay. He had said he loved her, and when he hung up, he sat for a while with the phone in his hand and then put it in his pocket and accepted the candy bar that Webb handed him without being asked and ate it with the grateful focus of a person tasting something ordinary and finding it extraordinary. James Reeves was writing. He had a small notebook that he kept in his left sleeve pocket, a habit from navigation school that had never left him, and he was writing the numbers down, the times, the headings, the altitudes, the sequence of events, because he was a navigator, and a navigator's response to something too large to process is to make it into numbers first and then deal with the rest of it later. Tara Okonkwo was sitting on an equipment case near the aircraft, watching the maintenance crew begin their damage assessment. She had her arms on her knees and she was watching the way she watched her instrument panel with total attention, seeing everything, showing very little of what she was thinking. One of the maintenance crew, a young airman, came over and said something to her, and she answered, and he walked away looking slightly stunned, which was a reasonable response to whatever she had told him. Danny Cho was standing apart from the others, looking at the aircraft. He had been standing there for a while, He had his hands in his pockets and his weight on one leg, and he was looking at the tail section, at the damage at the place where the metal had been opened up, and the internal structure was visible, and the aircraft had kept flying anyway. And he was thinking about the woman who had been sitting next to him for the last 3.5 hours, and about everything she had said and done and not done, and about what it meant. He was thinking about what it meant to spend 4 years hiding who you are, because who you are is too expensive to be. He was thinking about what it costs a person to put down the thing they are best at and the thing they love most, because the thing they love most has taken something from them that they cannot get back. He was thinking about what it takes to pick it back up. He was standing there thinking about all of that when his phone buzzed in his pocket. He looked at it. A message from a number he didn't recognize, which turned out to be Webb, who had apparently decided that the group needed a communications channel and had taken the initiative to create one. The message said, "I just heard they're considering giving Captain Carter a commendation. I think they should give her whatever she wants, including an explanation of what the hell just happened." Danny typed back, "She'll explain when she's ready. She earned that." A pause. Then Webb fare. Beer. Danny looked at the aircraft one more time. At the tail, at the holes in the fuselage that the afternoon light was coming through in thin golden lines. At the number 3 engine nacelle with its evidence of fire survived. At a machine that should not have brought them home and had. He typed back, yes, absolutely yes. And somewhere in Hartwell's office, Evelyn Carter was finishing the most honest conversation she had had in 4 years, telling the truth about who she was to someone who needed to know it, and finding in the telling that the truth was not the thing she had been afraid of. The truth was actually on balance a relief. The truth was something she could carry without hiding, and carrying things without hiding them is in the long run so much lighter. She did not know yet what came next. She did not know about the program, the decision, the specific shape of the future. She would know those things soon. But in this moment in this office on this specific Tuesday that had begun with bad coffee and a routine briefing and had become something else entirely, she knew one thing clearly. She was not done. She had thought she was done. She had told herself carefully and consistently for 4 years that she was done, that the person she had been was finished, archived, put away, that she was someone else now, and that someone else was enough. Today had taught her that you do not finish being what you are. You can stop using it. You can put it away. You can cover it with 4 years of quiet and routine and carefully managed invisibility. But it does not leave you. It stays exactly where you put it, waiting with the patience of something that knows it is permanent for the moment when you need it again. She had needed it. She had used it. And every one of her crew was alive because of it, and 2 enemy aircraft would not be returning to their base. And the sky above the Philippine Sea had been changed in some small but specific way by what a woman in a cargo plane had decided to become when she had no time left to be anything less than everything she was. Thomas would have understood that. She thought he would have. She thought he would have understood it completely, and probably would have said so in the particular way he had of saying true things quietly, directly, without making a production of them, and then would have changed the subject because he had never liked dwelling on the serious things once they were said. She missed him. She would always miss him. That was not going to change. But she was not going to let the missing be the only thing. She had decided that today, somewhere over the Philippine Sea at 24,000 feet, with missiles in the air, and 2 engines and a crew that needed her to be everything she had ever been. She stood up, straightened her flight suit, looked at Hartwell. "Tell me about the program," she said. Hartwell talked for 40 minutes. He talked about the program the way careful men talk about things they believe in, but have not yet been given permission to fully believe in, with specificity and restraint, laying out facts and letting the facts do the work that enthusiasm might compromise. He talked about the gap in transport crew training, about the doctrine deficit, about the 17 transport and tanker aircraft that had been lost in the previous decade, in circumstances where, in the assessment of people who studied these things better, tactical awareness on the part of the crews might have changed the outcome. He talked about the resistance from the acquisition chain, the budget arguments, the institutional inertia of an Air Force that had spent 60 years sorting its aircraft into categories: fighters, do the fighting transports, do the hauling, and building its entire training architecture around those categories. And then he put a folder on the desk between them. He did not open it. He just put it there and looked at it and then looked at her. "The program needs a director," he said, Someone who understands both sides of the equation, who has lived inside a fighter weapons school and also knows what it is to sit in the left seat of a cargo aircraft and understand its actual capabilities and its actual limitations. He paused. Today, Captain, you became the only person in the United States Air Force who can say they have done both of those things in a live combat engagement. She looked at the folder. What's in there? Your original service record, he said. The full one, not the redacted version that's been in your current personnel file. Something tightened in her chest. She had not seen that record in 4 years. She had not wanted to. Looking at it had seemed for a long time like looking at a person she was no longer willing to be. How did you get it? I requested it this morning, he said, while you were still airborne. He met her eyes steadily. I want you to understand something, Carter. The Air Force knew who you were when they assigned you here. The transport posting wasn't just accommodation. There are people in this building who have been watching you for a long time waiting to see whether you were going to find your way back to this. She stared at him. You're telling me this was deliberate. I'm telling you that when a pilot with your record requests a lateral transfer to transport aviation and buries herself in routine missions, for 4 years, some people in positions of authority notice. He leaned forward slightly. And some of those people believe that the path a person takes when they're carrying something heavy is sometimes exactly the path they need to take to become what they're supposed to become next. The silence in the office was very complete. Outside, she could hear the distant machinery of aircraft and equipment, and the ordinary business of a military installation at the end of a working day. Sounds she had listened to for 4 years without registering them as anything other than background. They sounded different now. She wasn't sure why. Tell me what the program actually looks like, she said. 12 weeks of curriculum development, working with the weapons school at Nellis. Then a pilot program with 2 transport squadrons, one here, one at Ramstein. The curriculum covers threat recognition, evasive energy management, defensive geometry, psychological tactics under fire. He paused. And one module that nobody has been able to write because nobody has had the experience to write it. Which module? What to do, Hartwell said. When you're unarmed and alone and the threat is overwhelming, and every standard doctrine says you're already dead. What to do when the only thing standing between your crew and the missile is your ability to think faster and differently than the person trying to kill you. He looked at her. Today you wrote that module, in real time, at 24,000 feet, with people's lives depending on every sentence. She did not answer immediately. She was thinking about Thomas, not in the sharp, aching way she usually thought about him, but in a different way, quieter, like hearing a familiar song from a great distance, recognizable and real, but no longer overwhelming. She was thinking about what he had said about shields and swords. She was thinking about the 17 aircraft, the crews, the people who had not had the information that might have changed the outcome. If I take this, she said, I'm not going back to fighters. No, he said, this isn't a path back to fighters. This is a different path entirely. Good, she said, and she meant it with a completeness that surprised her. Not because fighters were wrong, not because that part of her life had been anything other than what it was real important defining, but because she had spent 4 years carrying the weight of what she had walked away from, and today she had finally understood that she had not walked away from it at all. She had been carrying it with her the whole time, and now she knew what it was for. She picked up the folder, opened it, looked at the first page, her photograph taken 12 years ago, the rank insignia she had last worn on a flight suit before she had requested the transfer. She looked at the woman in the photograph for a long moment. Young, certain, already very good at the things she was built to do, and already carrying in the set of her jaw and the directness of her eyes the first traces of something more complicated than certainty. She closed the folder. When do I start? She said. Hartwell allowed himself briefly the expression of a man who has been waiting a long time for a particular conversation to go a particular way and is now watching it do exactly that. Monday, he said, but first I need you to do something. What? Your crew is outside, he said. They've been through something today that none of them are going to process for a while. They need their captain, not the program director, not the weapons instructor. Their captain. He stood up. Go be that first. She stood up, straightened her flight suit, moved toward the door, then stopped. Colonel, she said, Carter, when you pulled my record this morning, Before we landed, before you knew if we were going to make it back." She turned to look at him. "Why then?" Hartwell was quiet for a moment. "Because," he said, "the way you were flying that airplane told me you were going to make it back, even before the data supported it." He met her eyes. "Some things you just know." She walked out. The evening had fully arrived by the time she came through the operations building door and found her crew exactly where she had expected to find them, together in the approximate vicinity of the aircraft that had brought them home, in the organic, unplanned configuration that crews assume when they are still too close to something to move very far from it. Webb was sitting on the edge of the equipment cart with a can of something in his hand. Reeves was standing with his notebook still out, not writing anymore, just holding it. Tara was next to the aircraft, close to it, with one hand resting against the fuselage in a gesture that was, Evelyn thought, not so different from her own. Danny Cho was the first one to see her coming. He straightened slightly. The others tracked his movement and turned. She walked up to them and stopped, and looked at each of them in the way she had looked at them that morning at the briefing table before they flew, the same sweep, the same fixing of each face in her attention. But it felt different now. They were different now. All of them were different in the way that people are different after they have been through something real together, which is one of the few forms of difference that is genuinely permanent. "How is everybody?" she said. It was not quite a question. Webb answered first because Webb always answered first. "Alive," he said, which, given how the morning started, feels like a strong result. Tara still with her hand on the aircraft. "Good, I'm good." A pause. "The airplane is going to need a lot of work." "She earned it," Evelyn said. "She did," Tara said, and her voice had a quality in it that was not quite personal, but was not quite impersonal either. The voice of a flight engineer who has spent her career maintaining and monitoring an aircraft and has today seen it do something she will be rethinking for the rest of her life. James Reeves looked up from his notebook. "I've been going over the numbers," he said. "The geometry of what we did in the cloud deck. The timing of the terrain masking. The intercept window we opened for the F-35s. He paused. "I'm a navigator. I spend my time calculating where we are and where we need to be. And what you did today, the spatial reasoning, the real-time calculation of enemy positions and intercept angles, that wasn't transport flying." "No," Evelyn said, "it wasn't." "Were you going to tell us?" he asked, not accusatory, genuinely curious in the way that precise people are curious. He wanted the accurate answer, whatever it was. "I didn't think I needed to," she said. "It hadn't been relevant for 4 years. She looked at him. "Does it change anything for you?" Reeves thought about it with the seriousness it deserved. "It changes my understanding of what happened," he said. "It doesn't change anything about how I feel about it." He closed the notebook and put it in his pocket. "I'd fly with you again tomorrow." "So would I," Tara said immediately without looking up from the aircraft. Yusuf Dantes, who had been quiet through most of this, said something then that surprised all of them, including himself. He said it quietly and directly, the way young people sometimes say the truest things without the layers of qualification that experience teaches you to add. "I called my mother," he said. "I told her I was fine. I didn't tell her what happened because I didn't know how to explain it." He looked at Evelyn. "How do you explain something like today?" She thought about that, about how you explain a thing that is too large for the normal categories of explanation. "You don't at first," she said. "You just let yourself have it for a while. You carry it without putting words on it until the words find you." She paused. "And then one day you understand what it gave you, and that's when you can start to tell it." Dantes nodded slowly. He was 23, and he had just had the most important day of his life, and he did not know yet what it had given him, but he believed, listening to her, that he would know eventually. That was enough for now. Danny Cho had been watching this whole exchange from slightly outside it, in the particular way of a co-pilot who has spent an entire flight reading his captain and who has not yet stopped reading her. He waited until the others had settled into their own quiet spaces before he walked over to stand next to her. "I've been thinking," he said, about how you knew he'd make one more run," he said. "Dragon 1. You said he would, and he did. You said exactly what he was going to do before he did it." He paused. "You were inside his head." "I was inside his training," she said, "which is the same thing for a pilot." "But how? You've never met him. You don't know anything about him." She was quiet for a moment, looking at the aircraft the way she had been looking at it on and off all evening, not with the detachment of assessment, but with something more personal. When you spend 10 years flying fighters, teaching fighters, building training programs for pilots who are trying to kill each other in the most effective possible way, you learn that the aircraft are different, but the psychology isn't, she said. Pride, training, pattern recognition. The way a skilled person responds when their skill is being challenged. Those things are the same in every cockpit, in every Air Force in the world. She looked at Danny. Dragon 1 was a good pilot. He was very good, and he was proud, and he'd been beaten by something that should not have been able to beat him. Those three things together always produce the same result. One more run, Danny said. One more run, she confirmed. He was quiet for a moment, then, that's what you were in fighters, wasn't it? You studied this. Not just how to fly, but how pilots think. Weapons instructor school, she said. It's less about flying and more about psychology. How to construct situations that force the enemy into decisions they don't want to make. How to understand what a person will do before they do it based on what they've been trained to do and who they are underneath the training. She paused. It's chess, but at 1,000 miles an hour and at altitude, and the pieces have feelings. Danny laughed. It was a real laugh, the first real one from him since before the contacts had appeared on the radar, and it sounded, she thought, like relief taking on a new form. What happened next was not something anyone had planned or arranged. It developed the way true things develop without announcement organically because the moment called for it. One of the maintenance airmen who had been doing the damage assessment on the C-13 came over to the crew, a young woman 20 years old with grease on her forearms and the expression of someone who has been looking at something all evening and needs to say something about it. She stopped a respectable distance from Evelyn and said with the directness of someone who has decided the social calculus of speaking up is worth it. Ma'am, I've been doing airframe damage assessment for 3 years. I've seen aircraft come back from hard missions. She paused. I have never seen an aircraft come back from what I'm looking at on your bird and land clean on a runway. Another pause. I just wanted to say that. Evelyn looked at her. What's your name? Airman Specialist Chen, ma'am. Chen, Evelyn said. The aircraft came back because the crew kept it flying. Every one of them. That's what you're looking at. That's the story of that damage. Chen looked at the crew one by one with the earnest attention of a young person encountering something they have not seen before and want to understand. Then she nodded once with a seriousness that was beyond her years but not beyond her and went back to her assessment. Marcus Webb watched her go and then looked at Evelyn. You know, he said, you could have just said thank you. That wouldn't have been the true thing, Evelyn said. Yeah, he said, but it would have been easier. I don't do easier, she said. I do true. Webb grinned, the full version of the grin completely back, now unreserved, the one that made him look like he'd gotten away with something. No, he said. You definitely don't do easier. He raised his can toward her. To the most complicated Tuesday I have ever had. The others echoed it in the scattered, unsynchronized way of people who are not performing a toast, but are genuinely agreeing with one. Tara tapped the fuselage once gently with the flat of her hand, which was her version of the same thing. Evelyn did not raise anything because she had nothing in her hand, but she received it. She let herself receive it fully and without qualification, which was something she was not always good at, but which tonight she understood was the right thing. These people had trusted her with their lives, and she had not lost them, and accepting their acknowledgement of that without deflecting it was the honest response. So she accepted it. The twist that came the following morning was not dramatic. It did not arrive with fanfare or official ceremony or any of the external markers that important things are sometimes given to signal their importance. It arrived in the form of a call from Nellis Air Force Base at 7:40 in the morning to Hartwell's office, where Evelyn was already sitting with her second cup of coffee and the folder she had taken from his desk the night before, which she had spent part of the night reading. Working her way through the record of the person she had been with, the measured attention of someone getting reacquainted with something they had been away from for a long time. The call was from Brigadier General Patricia Morse, the commander of the Air Force Weapons School, and Morse got to the point in approximately 45 seconds, which told Evelyn something about her immediately. Captain Carter, she said, I've been on the phone with Rodriguez's AWACS team since 5 this morning. I've looked at every frame of the radar data. I've talked to Major Bennett. A pause. I need you to understand something. What you did yesterday doesn't fit any category we have. We don't have a training module for it because we didn't know it was possible. It's possible, Evelyn said. I know that now, Morse said. I need you to teach me how. The silence was brief. Then, not just you, Evelyn said. Every transport crew in the Pacific Theater. A pause on Morse's end, then with the decisive quality of a general who has made up her mind. Let's start with that and see where it goes. General, Evelyn said, I have one condition. Name it. The program isn't built around what I did yesterday, she said. Yesterday was specific to my background. We can't replicate that. What we can replicate is the principle underneath it. The principle that vulnerability is not the same as helplessness. That a crew that understands threat psychology and energy management and defensive geometry can survive things that doctrine says they can't survive. She paused. We build a program around what any trained crew can do if they know what to do, not around what one pilot with a classified background can do. Another pause, longer. That's a more modest program than what the data supports, Morse said. It's a more honest program, Evelyn said, and it'll save more lives. When she came out of Hartwell's office that second time Danny Cho was in the corridor, he had apparently been there for a while. He was leaning against the wall with his arms folded, and the expression of a man who is not quite eavesdropping, but is also not making any particular effort not to hear what's coming through the door. Morse, he said, how did you know? Rodriguez called Bennett. Bennett called me, he said. This morning? She wanted to know who was flying in the left seat yesterday. I told her. She said she thought so. He straightened up from the wall. What did you tell Morse? She told him. He listened to the whole thing without interrupting, which was a quality she had noticed in him from the beginning and valued more now than she had then. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. You could have pushed for reinstatement, he said. Full reinstatement. Fighters. After yesterday, they'd have given it to you. I know, she said, but you didn't. No. He looked at her with the frank curiosity of someone who is genuinely trying to understand a decision they find both confusing and admirable. Why not? She thought about Thomas. She thought about the 17 aircraft. She thought about Yusuf Dantes holding a photograph of his mother in the cargo hold of an aircraft that was being shot out of the sky, and she thought about what it would have meant if Dante had had better tools, if every cargo crew had better tools. If the gap between what transport pilots knew and what they needed to know had been smaller by even a fraction, by even one well-designed training module taught by someone who understood both sides of the problem. Because she said fighters win battles, and I'm more interested in the ones that should have been saved before the battle started. Danny was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something that she had not expected and that hit her somewhere she had not been expecting to be hit. Thomas would have said that, he said. She looked at him. I never told you his name. Webb did, he said. He asked Reeves, who apparently did some research after we landed. A pause. I'm sorry, I probably shouldn't have. No, she said, it's all right. And it was. It was all right in the specific way that things become all right when they are brought into the open, not easier, not smaller, but no longer sealed away, where the pressure can build. Yes, she said, he would have. 3 weeks later, May, the first cohort of transport crew pilots arrived at a conference room at Anderson Air Force Base for a briefing that was not on any standard training schedule. 22 pilots and co-pilots from 3 different squadrons, ranging from first lieutenants to major, all of them transport qualified. None of them expecting anything extraordinary from what had been described in their orders as a supplemental survivability training module. Evelyn walked in at precisely the scheduled start time because she was always precisely on time, and she put a single sheet of paper on the table in front of each pilot, and she stood at the front of the room and looked at them the way she had looked at everything since she was 24 years old, and first walked into a weapons school classroom with the full weight of her attention, which was in its own quiet way an act of respect. The sheet of paper had 3 sentences on it. She let them read it. Then she read it aloud because some things need to be heard, not just seen. You fly aircraft that have no weapons. You fly missions that take you into airspace that can become hostile without warning. This course is about what happens next. The room was very quiet, the kind of quiet that occurs when 22 people simultaneously understand that the thing they have walked into is not what they expected. The major in the front row, a heavy-set man named Caldwell who had been flying C-17 SOAS for 11 years, and who had the politely skeptical expression of a senior pilot who has sat through a great deal of mandatory training and has learned to manage his expectations accordingly, raised his hand. "Captain Carter," he said, "I've read the preliminary materials on this course. With respect, what can transport crews actually do against a fighter threat? We're not equipped for this." She had been expecting this question. She had prepared for it, but not the way a person prepares for a question they find difficult. The way a person prepares for a question they have been waiting for. "Major Caldwell," she said, "3 weeks ago in this theater, a C-130 crew survived a sustained engagement against 10 enemy J-20 fighters. They had no weapons, they had no escort, they had a partially jammed tactical system and weather that made terrain masking difficult." She paused. By the time Allied air support arrived, 2 enemy aircraft had been destroyed and 3 more had aborted their missions due to tactical confusion. Every member of the crew walked away. Caldwell stared at her. "I heard about that incident. The report said the crew had specialized knowledge aboard." "The crew had 1 crew member with specialized knowledge," she said. "This course exists so that the specialized knowledge is no longer one person's secret, so that every crew in this room and every crew that comes through after you has access to it." She looked at all of them. "You are not helpless. You have never been helpless. You just haven't been taught what you can do." The room had a different quality now. The polite skepticism had shifted into something else, not yet belief, but the opening of the space where belief can grow, which is the thing that has to come first. She recognized it. She had seen it in weapons school classrooms, in simulation rooms, in the faces of very good pilots who had just been shown something that expanded what they thought was possible. "Here's the first thing I'm going to teach you," she said. "It is not a maneuver. It is not a tactical procedure. It is a concept. Write it down if you want, but I'd rather you understand it than write it." She paused. Let the room settle completely. "The enemy's greatest advantage is not his missile or his aircraft or his training," she said. "His greatest advantage is his certainty about what you are going to do. The moment you do something he does not expect, that advantage is gone. You become a problem he has to solve instead of a target he has to acquire." Another pause. "This course is about how to become a problem." Caldwell had his pen down. He was just listening. That was the right response. She noted it without making anything of it. She talked for 4 hours that first day. She covered threat psychology, she covered energy management, she covered the basic geometry of defensive maneuvering. She used examples, real ones, recent ones, some of them from the engagement 3 weeks prior, stripped of identifying details, and presented as tactical problems to be analyzed rather than stories to be admired. She asked questions and required answers, and pushed back on answers that were technically correct but strategically insufficient. And by the end of the 4 hours, the room had the feeling of a room where something genuine was happening, where the people in the seats were working rather than just listening. When she dismissed them, Caldwell stopped at the door. "Captain Carter," he said. "Major, the Su-130 engagement." He paused. "The crew member with the specialized knowledge." He looked at her steadily. "That was you." It was not a question. She had not confirmed it, in the room had not intended to, had built the curriculum specifically so that it did not depend on the biography of its author for its credibility. But Caldwell was 11 years in and observant, and he had done the math. "The crew survived," she said. "That's what matters." He looked at her for a moment longer. Then he nodded once with the seriousness of a man who has just calibrated something important in his understanding of the world, and walked out. Marcus Webb came to find her that evening. He had no official reason to be at the training building, but Webb had never been especially constrained by official reasons when he felt that something mattered. He brought 2 cups of coffee and handed her one without asking if she wanted it, because that was who he was. They stood in the corridor for a moment, both drinking, not saying anything, in the comfortable quiet of people who have been through something together that makes the ordinary coordinates of a conversation unnecessary. "How'd it go?" he said finally. "Good," she said. "It went good. They get it, the pilots. Some of them are getting it. Some of them will get it later. Some of them won't get it until the day they need it." She held her cup with both hands. "That's how it always works." He nodded. "Dante put in for a navigator qualification course," he said. "Did you hear a no?" "Yeah, says he wants to understand the geometry better. What you did with the train, masking he kept asking Reeves to explain it, and eventually Reeves said he should just learn it himself. A pause. Reeves is thinking about putting in for a tactics certification. She looked at him. And you? He grinned, the full easy grin. I'm a loadmaster, ma'am. I have my lane. A beat. But I've been reading some things about threat recognition from a non-pilot perspective. What a loadmaster can contribute to situational awareness during an engagement. He shrugged with the casualness of a man downplaying something he cares about significantly. Seems like there might be a role. There's absolutely a role. Zero, she said. Maybe you could write a module, he said. She looked at him for a moment. Then she almost smiled, the small private version. Maybe I will, she said. He raised his coffee cup toward her, and she raised hers back, and they drank, and outside the Pacific evening was doing what Pacific evenings do, going dark slowly, the light coming off the water in long diminishing lines, the base settling into its nighttime rhythms, aircraft moving people, moving the ordinary machinery of a place that exists to project capability into a complicated world. A year later, the program was running in 8 transport squadrons across 3 theaters. The curriculum had been expanded 3 times, each expansion driven by data from the field, by moments in training exercises where crews who had come through the program performed better, thought faster, made fewer fatal assumptions about what they were and were not capable of doing when the situation went wrong. The program did not turn transport pilots into fighter pilots. It was not designed to. It turned transport pilots into pilots who understood that the category they had been assigned did not define the limit of what they could do. Evelyn Carter never flew fighters again. She flew transport aircraft on missions that required a transport aircraft with crews that were always after a few flights, quietly certain that their captain was not quite what she appeared to be, that there was something in the quality of her attention, in the precision of her control inputs, in the specific way she listened to tactical briefings that did not belong to any standard definition of a cargo pilot. They were right about that. And they were also wrong because she was exactly what she appeared to be, a transport pilot with everything that term meant and everything it had always contained. She was asked years later to speak to an incoming class at the Air Force Weapons School. Standing in front of a room full of the best fighter pilots in the service, each one already excellent, each one trained to a standard that most pilots never reach. She said the thing she had spent years arriving at, the thing she now understood, was the truest version of what she knew. You are going to be very good, she said. Some of you are going to be exceptional. You're going to fly aircraft that do things no other aircraft can do, and you're going to do them at the edge of what a human body and a human mind can manage. And it's going to matter. All of it is going to matter. She paused. Let that land. But I want you to understand something. The measure of a pilot, the real measure, not the trophy and not the record and not the call sign, is not what you do when your aircraft is at its best and you are at your best and the conditions favor you. She looked at each face in turn the way she looked at everything. The measure is what you do when all of that is gone, when the aircraft is damaged, when your crew is scared, when the doctrine says you're already dead. Another pause. The room was completely still. What you do then, she said, is become everything you have ever been. All at once, at the exact moment it's needed. She let the quiet hold for one more second. That's what I want you to remember. Not the tactics, not the procedures, the willingness to be completely and without apology everything that you are when the sky asks you for it. She walked out of that room the way she walked into every room, without looking for the reaction, without measuring the effect, because the teaching was the thing, and what people did with it afterward was their own. She got into her aircraft. She flew home. And somewhere above the Pacific, at altitude where the air is thin and the horizon is very far away, and the silence is the particular kind that only exists at the edge of the sky, Captain Evelyn Carter, transport pilot, fighter pilot, weapons instructor, teacher, sister, and the woman who had flown a cargo plane through the middle of a war and brought everyone home, put her hands on the controls of an aircraft she loved and flew it the way she always flew it, with everything she had, with everything she was, with everything she had ever been and would ever be at exactly the moment the sky asked for it. That was who she was. That had always been who she was, and they had all been wrong to think otherwise, not because they were unkind, but because she had let them be wrong for 4 years until the day she could no longer afford to. The day she became again exactly herself. That was enough. That had always been enough, and now finally she knew it. 6 years after a transport pilot flew a wounded cargo plane through 10 enemy fighters and walked away, the lesson she had carved out of that one impossible day was about to be tested again by a man who had been sitting in the right seat for all of it. He didn't know that yet. He thought he was flying a milk run, but before the night was over, Captain Danny Cho would have a plane full of people who couldn't fight back a clock, he couldn't stop, and a voice in his head that wasn't his own, telling him the same things it had told him once at 24,000 feet over the Philippine Sea. And he was about to find out whether the thing Evelyn Carter taught was real or just a story men tell each other to feel braver than they are. Let's go back up into the dark. They called him the Quiet One, and they meant it the way people had once meant it about her. Captain Danny Cho was 35 years old now, with a little gray starting at his temples and the same color-coded tabs on the same kind of checklist he had laid out on a briefing table the first morning he ever flew with Evelyn Carter. He had his own crew now, his own aircraft, his own left seat in a C-13OJ, operating out of a forward field whose name does not matter for this story, except to say that it sat close enough to a disputed line on a map that everyone who flew out of it understood. In the quiet animal part of themselves, that routine was a word people used right up until the day it stopped being true. His co-pilot that night was First Lieutenant Maya Sorensen, 27 sharp as a scalpel, and not yet sure of it. She reminded Danny of himself, which is to say she reminded him of who he had been before a woman he barely understood had taken him into a cloud deck full of fighter jets and brought him out the other side a different person. Sorensen was good. She just didn't believe it yet. That was a thing you could see in a pilot if you knew how to look, and Danny had learned how to look from the best there had ever been at it. In the cargo hold sat Staff Sergeant Diego Reyes, his loadmaster 29, and built like a man who moved freight for a living, which he did. Reyes had come up through a pipeline that included a module written by a loadmaster named Marcus Webb about what a man in the back of the airplane can see and say when the geometry goes wrong and the people up front have their hands full of a dying aircraft. Reyes had read it 4 times. He did not know that the man who wrote it had been in the back of the airplane on the day the whole program was born. Some lineages run quietly. And in the hold that night, strapped into the red webbing seats that ran down both sides of the fuselage, were 19 people who were not crew. 11 were wounded. 2 were children. One was a flight nurse named Captain Aisha Bello, who had not slept in 30 hours, and who was at that moment holding a saline line in one hand and the hand of a frightened 7-year-old in the other. The mission was an evacuation, the kind nobody puts in a recruiting video. A coastal facility had become untenable faster than anyone had planned for a flashpoint that had spent years pretending to be a negotiation, had over the course of a single afternoon stopped pretending, and the order had come down to pull the non-combatants and the casualties out before the window closed. Danny's aircraft was the last one out, the very last. Everyone else was already gone. That was the part that mattered. There was no second airplane behind him. If this one didn't make it, the people in the back didn't make it. He had briefed it the way he briefed everything, the way he had learned from watching her completely, without drama, the threats named out loud, so nobody had to carry the fear of the unspoken thing. Surface-to-air coverage along the coast. The possibility characterized in the intelligence cut as low to moderate, which Danny had learned was the phrase intelligence officers used right before they were wrong of fighter activity if the situation escalated. Weather coming in from the west, a thick layered deck tops in the mid-20s, a wall of it stacking up over the water. "We go out low and dark," he had told his crew. "Lights out terrain, masking off the islands. While we have them, then we climb into the weather and use it for cover until we're feet wet and out of the envelope. 40 minutes of careful flying. Then it's a long, boring ride home and Reyes buys the first round." "I always buy the first round," Reyes had said. "That's why we keep you." They had lifted off into a moonless dark at a few minutes past 2 in the morning. Heavy with fuel and freight and frightened people. And for the first 18 minutes, everything was exactly as boring as Danny had promised them it would be. Then Sorensen looked up from her display in a particular way. Danny saw it the way Evelyn had once seen it in a navigator named Reeves, not by reading her face, which he couldn't fully see in the red cockpit light, but by the way she stopped moving. "Captain," she said, her voice was careful, "I've got 2 fast movers off the coast, coming off the mainland, climbing. Danny pulled the picture up on his own screen, and something in his chest went very still. Not panic. He had learned a long time ago from a woman who did it better than anyone alive. What the difference was between fear and stillness, and how to choose the second one on purpose. 2 contacts. Fast. Climbing out over the water on a vector that was not yet an intercept, but was assembling itself into one with the unhurried confidence of an aircraft whose pilot already knew where you were and was in no particular hurry about it. J-20SR, Sorensen said quietly, or near enough that it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter, Danny agreed. He keyed the AWACS frequency and a controller 100 miles south came back with the flat, deliberate calm of a professional choosing every word. They were tracking the picture. 2 high-speed contacts. Best assessment, hostile. Friendly fighter assets were a long way off too far, the way they are always somehow too far at the exact moment you need them close. The controller gave him a number. The number was not good. Copy, Danny said. We'll manage. In the right seat, Maya Sorensen turned and looked at him with an expression he recognized because he had worn it once himself, sitting where she was sitting, listening to a woman say those exact 2 words in that exact tone over an ocean that had no intention of giving anyone back. We'll manage, Sorensen said. And Danny Cho heard himself answer her with words he had not chosen, words that came up out of a place below, choosing words that had been spoken to him once when he was the scared one, and the impossible was the thing on the screen. Don't panic, he said. I'm not panicking. You're about to. He almost smiled. And then you're going to be exactly as good as I know you are. Both of those things are going to happen. Let's make sure the second one happens loudest. Here is the thing the story almost never tells you about teaching someone something true. It does not arrive as a memory. When the moment comes, when the missile is closed, when the sky is asking you for everything, you do not pause to remember the lesson. There is no time. The lesson is simply there already inside the motion, the way your first language is there when you speak with no act of translation in between. You do not recall it. You become it. Danny Cho did not think about Evelyn Carter in the next 11 minutes. He did not have a single conscious thought with her name in it, and she was in every input his hands made. Reyes, he said over the interphone, and his voice had changed, not louder, not harder, but settled into something Sorensen had never heard from him in 2 years of flying, the sound of a man who had been somewhere like this before and had come home from it. We've got company, 2 fighters off the coast working an intercept. I need the back of this airplane locked down, and I need everyone braced for maneuvering. Not gentle maneuvering. Tell the nurse. Tell her now. Copy, Captain. No questions. Webb's module 4 times read, doing its quiet work. Securing the hold, bracing the patients. I'll call you when they're set. Sorensen. Danny was already pulling the terrain data forward, the chain of islands strung out below them in the dark like stepping stones across a black river. Show me the low ground, the ridgeline on the second island, the valley behind it. Captain, that terrain at night with no moon fully loaded, this is... Show me the ridge, Maya. She showed him the ridge. He looked at it for exactly 3 seconds. Then he did the thing that no doctrine for a heavy transport aircraft recommends, the thing that exists in exactly one place in the entire training architecture of the United States Air Force. In a single module written by a woman who had done it once for real. A module that began with a sentence Danny had read so many times he could have recited it in his sleep. What follows is not what you are supposed to do. It is what you do when what you are supposed to do is die. He took the airplane down into the dark against the islands. Not recklessly. Never recklessly. That was the part the story always got wrong. The part that made it sound like courage when it was actually the opposite of courage. The opposite of throwing yourself at the danger and hoping. He flew the terrain the way she had taught the terrain to be flown as a wall, to put between yourself and the threat's radar, a moving shadow of rock and altitude that swallowed the big, slow heat and metal shape of a cargo plane and made it for crucial seconds at a time. Simply not there. He used the islands. He used the black water in the valleys between them, where the radar returns turned to clutter. He flew lower than he had ever flown a loaded Swan 3. Oh, with the radar altimeter feeding him numbers and his hands feeding the airplane corrections so small that Sorensen, watching, understood for the first time in her life that she had never actually seen anyone fly before. Braces set, Reyes called from the back. His voice was tight but level. Hold secure. Nurse has the patients. We're with you, Captain. Good man, Danny said. And somewhere in the saying of it was the ghost of another voice that had once said those exact words in this exact tone to a loadmaster named Webb, though Danny did not know he was quoting anyone at all. The The first fighter committed. Danny felt the warning system change its tone, searched to track, and his body answered before his mind finished reading it. He did not run. He had been taught by the only person he had ever met who understood it in her bones that running from a faster aircraft is a way of choosing the time and place of your own death and handing the choice to your enemy. So he did not run, he thought. He used the next island, timing his brake to put its bulk between himself and the fighter at the exact moment the geometry mattered most, and he reached up and worked the defensive systems in a pattern he had drilled 1,000 times and never once used in anger-dispensing flares, in a sequence designed not to win, but to confuse, to introduce just enough doubt into a missile's small electronic mind to cost it the clean kill. There was no clean kill. The fighter's first shot, if it was a shot at all, and not a probe, went wide into the dark, and the water in the night lit up orange for half a second and went black again. And in the back of the airplane, a child screamed, and the nurse said something soft and certain that nobody up front could hear, and the airplane flew on. That was close, Sorensen breathed. That was them learning we're not easy, Danny said. They'll be smarter now. The good ones always are. He was already scanning the threat display, the weather, the wall of cloud building to the west that he had been quietly steering toward this entire time, the way a man crossing an open field keeps one eye on the tree line. How far to the weather? 8 miles to the edge of the deck. 8 miles. Danny did the math the way she had taught him to do math fast complete without letting the size of the numbers frighten him into not doing it. 8 miles. The fighters reforming for a coordinated pass. A loaded airplane that could not climb fast or turn hard. And a wall of cloud that if he could reach it, would do to 2 fighters exactly what a different cloud deck had done to 9 of them 6 years ago over a different sea. We're going into the weather, Reyes. It's going to get rough. Maya hands on follow me through, don't fight me. The second we're in the cloud, I'm changing everything, heading altitude, all of it, and I'm changing it fast, and I need you precise. What are we doing? We're going to disappear, he said, and then we're going to come out somewhere they're not looking. And while they sort out where we went, the inside of that cloud is going to be full of 2 fighters who can't see anything, very close to each other, very confused, very fast. He pushed the throttles up. That makes them dangerous. To us, if we're in the wrong place. To each other, if we're not. You've done this before, Sorensen said. It was not a question. No, Danny said honestly, but I watched someone do it once, and she lived, and so did I. And so did everyone in the back of her airplane. He glanced at the cloud wall rushing toward the windscreen, gray-black and enormous in the landing lights he had not turned on. Hold on. The cloud swallowed them whole. Inside the weather, the world shrank to the instrument panel and the discipline of trusting it absolutely. There is no terror quite like it for a pilot's solid cloud, no horizon, no up, that your inner ear will agree to nothing but numbers on glass, and the knowledge that they are the only thing keeping you alive, that the moment you trust your body over the instruments, you begin to die without knowing it. Danny had been afraid of exactly this once, in exactly this kind of cloud, and had watched a woman fly through it as calmly as if she were taxiing to a gate. Her calm had not been the absence of fear. It was a decision she made faster than fear could form. He made the same decision now. Heading 270, descending watch our terrain floor, he said, and Sorensen called the numbers back, and the 2 of them worked the airplane through the blind gray middle of the storm in a language of question and answer that had no wasted words in it. He turned. He descended. He changed the airplane's entire signature, where it was going, how high it sat, so that the picture the fighters had built of him became in the space of 90 seconds completely useless. And on a frequency he had no official business listening to, a frequency a young systems specialist had quietly enabled for him before the mission, because he was the captain and he had asked the same way a young specialist had once done it for her. Danny heard the 2 fighters lose him. He did not understand the language. He didn't need to. The tone of a man whose radar is not showing him what it should show him is the same in every language ever spoken. He heard it climb half a register. He heard a second voice answer it, urgent, too close, the sound of 2 very fast aircraft discovering they were nearer to each other in the blind cloud than either of them wanted to be. He heard the flight lead order a break, the hard discipline of a good pilot trying to buy spacing from a situation that was turning against him by the second. And in the gap that the break created, Danny Cho brought a loaded cargo plane out of the southern edge of the weather on a heading that was nothing like the one he had gone in on low. Over Blackwater, lights out, feet wet 12 miles from where two fighters were still untangling themselves from a cloud and from each other. "We're out," Sorensen said, and her voice cracked on it, not from fear, but from the enormous, unbearable relief of a thing that should not have worked, having worked. "We're out, and they're still in there." "Not for long," Danny said. "Maybe 30 seconds. Their lead is good. He'll sort them." He was already scanning, already counting, already thinking 3 moves ahead the way the game required. But 30 seconds is 12 miles and a wall of weather between us and them, and now we're out over the water with nothing but dark in every direction, and our friendly fighters are finally close enough to matter. He keyed the radio. "Reyes, how's the back?" A pause, then Reyes, and there was something in his voice, the first frayed edge of a grin coming back from somewhere it had gone. "Honest answer, Captain. Always. That was the worst flying I've ever felt in my life, and I have never been so glad to feel it. Patients are holding, nurse is a machine, the little girl threw up on me, and I have never loved anyone more." A breath. "We're okay. We're all okay back here. Get us home." "Copy," Danny said and pressed his transmit button twice without speaking, and Reyes understood the way the back of an airplane always understands. "Received. Thank you. Hold on." He did not know where the gesture came from. It came from 6 years ago, from a cockpit over a different sea, from a captain who had done the exact same thing to the exact same loadmaster's words, and who had taught a generation of pilots without ever telling them she was teaching them anything at all. The friendly fighters arrived 4 minutes later, a flight of F-35s out of the dark, fast and certain, sliding into the geometry like a door closing. And the 2 hostile fighters who had finally clawed their way out of the weather to find their easy target gone, and the airspace suddenly full of aircraft that could fight back, did the thing that professionals do when the math turns against them. They broke off. They turned for home. There was no glory in it for them, and no shame either. They had been beaten by an airplane that wasn't supposed to be able to beat them, by a pilot who refused to be the category his aircraft had assigned him, and somewhere over the water a flight lead they would never meet was learning the same lesson a man called Dragon 1 had learned 6 years before. The lead F-35 pilot's voice came over the tactical frequency, and it carried an edge that Danny recognized, the edge of a fighter pilot who has just watched a cargo plane do something a cargo plane cannot do, and is revising in real time what they thought they knew. "Cargo flight, this is your escort. We have your 6. That was..." A pause, the pause of someone choosing a word. "That was the best flying I've seen in a long time. Who taught you to fly like that?" And Danny Cho, 35 years old, with 19 people alive in the back of his airplane, who would not have been alive if a woman he barely understood had not once taken him into a cloud, and out the other side keyed the radio and gave the only answer there was. "Carter," he said. "Her name's Carter. You wouldn't have heard of her. She flies trucks. Captain Evelyn Carter, Major, though she still answered to Captain when old crew members used it, and let them. Because some names are gifts, and you do not correct a gift," was 61 years old, and standing at the back of a classroom, she no longer taught in watching someone else teach the module she had written. It was a Tuesday. It is almost always a Tuesday in the end. The mornings that change everything do not announce themselves. They arrive smelling of bad coffee and institutional carpet, and you only learn what they were much later, looking back. She had been retired for 2 years. The program she had built out of one impossible day had outlived her active service, and would outlive her entirely, the way the things that matter are supposed to, running now, in 14 squadrons across 5 theaters, taught by instructors, who had been taught by instructors who had been taught by her, the lineage already long enough that some of the young pilots in the seats did not know her name and never would. She had made sure of that on purpose. She had built the curriculum so it did not depend on the biography of its author, so the lesson could stand on its own legs without needing a hero to lean on. That was the only kind of teaching she trusted, the kind that doesn't need you to keep believing in it after you're gone. She had come back that day for a ceremony she had tried to decline and had been politely refused permission to decline. They were naming the program after someone, and she had assumed, with the flat resignation of a private person being made public against her will, that they were going to name it after her. They had not. They had named it after Thomas. She found that out standing at the back of the room when the colonel at the podium, a woman named Bennett, who had flown an F-35 to a cargo plane's rescue once over the Philippine Sea, and had never forgotten the woman's voice on the other end of the radio saying, We're going to be okay in a tone that made you believe it said the name out loud. The Thomas Carter Tactical Survival Program. Her brother, her older brother who had flown fighters before she did, who had taught her about shields and swords on a back porch a lifetime ago, who had told her once that the measure of a sword is not how it cuts, but who it protects, and who had died young in an aircraft over a different ocean before she ever pinned on the wings that would let her understand what he had meant. She had spent 4 years after his death flying transports telling herself she was finished. She had been wrong. She had learned that over the Philippine Sea in an airplane full of people who needed her to become everything she had ever been. And everything she had ever been, it turned out, included him. He was in every input her hands made that day, the same way she was now in every input made by a man named Danny Cho, the same way Danny would someday be in the hands of someone whose name neither of them would ever know. That is how it works. That is the only way it has ever worked. Nobody teaches anybody anything that ends with them. After the ceremony, an officer she did not recognize found her at the back of the room and handed her a folded sheet of paper. "This came in for you," he said, "through the program office. A captain forwarded it up the chain and asked that it reach you personally." She unfolded it. It was a printout of a message, the kind that gets logged after an operational mission stripped of most of its detail and cleared for release. She read it twice. It described in the flat, dispassionate language of an after-action report a night evacuation. A loaded C-13 OJ, last aircraft out, 19 souls in the hold, including casualties and children. 2 hostile fighters. Terrain masking off a chain of islands. A deliberate entry into instrument conditions to defeat a coordinated intercept. A heading change of approximately 140 degrees inside the weather. All personnel recovered safely. The aircraft commander was a captain. At the bottom, someone had added a single line by hand in pen, the way you add the thing the official report has no box for. "Tell her it worked." D. Cho. Evelyn Carter stood very still in the back of a classroom that no longer belonged to her, holding a piece of paper, while a young instructor at the front of the room who did not know her name, who would teach this lesson, his whole career without ever knowing whose hands had first flown. It said the words she had written so many years ago that she had half forgotten writing them. The measure of a pilot is not what you do when the aircraft is at its best, and you are at your best and the conditions favor you. The measure is what you do when all of that is gone, when the doctrine says you're already dead. What you do then is become everything you have ever been all at once, at the exact moment it's needed. She had written that about herself. She had been wrong. She understood now, holding a stranger's message about a night she had not flown, that she had been writing it about all of them. Every crew that would ever come after every scared lieutenant in a right seat, every load master bracing patience in a hold, every captain choosing stillness over panic in a cloud full of fighters. She had written it about a continuity that did not need her, and had paid her the one tribute that mattered by not needing her, by working without her in the dark over the water, in the hands of a man she had once told to be exactly as good as she knew he was. He had been better than she knew. She folded the paper carefully and put it in the breast pocket of her jacket over the place where Dante had once held a photograph against his chest in a shaking airplane, and she did not let anyone see her face for a moment, and then she did, because there was nothing on it she was ashamed of. There is a small airfield far from anything important, where retired pilots sometimes keep small airplanes for no reason other than that the sky asked something of them once, and they have never stopped wanting to answer. Evelyn Carter kept one there, a little single-engine thing. Nothing like the great gray workhorse she had flown through a war. Nothing like the fighter that had made her name before she gave the name away. Just an airplane. Just the controls in the air and the long, clean honesty of being up where the horizon is far away. And the silence is the particular kind that only exists at the edge of the sky. She flew it home that evening after the ceremony, after the message, after the name of her brother had been spoken out loud in a room full of people who would carry forward a thing that started on a back porch with 2 children and a sword that was really a shield. She climbed up into the last of the light. She leveled off. She put her hands on the controls of an aircraft she loved. In the gray water far below caught the sun in long diminishing lines. The way it had the day she first understood that you do not finish being what you are. That it stays exactly where you put it, patient and permanent, waiting for the moment you need it again, and that the only thing better than needing it yourself is watching it answer in the hands of someone you taught. She thought about Danny Cho somewhere on the other side of the world getting some sleep, his color-coded tabs squared away, his crew alive, his quiet a little deeper than it had been. She thought about Thomas, and for the first time in a very long time, the thought did not ache. It was more like hearing a familiar song from a great distance, recognizable and real, and no longer something she had to brace against, because she finally understood that he had never actually left. He was in the program with his name on it. He was in her hands on these controls. He was in a cloud over a distant sea in the hands of a man who had never met him, who had been saved by a lesson. He gave a sister, who gave it to a co-pilot, who gave it to 19 strangers in a hold one moonless night, and who would give it again and again down a line with no end that she would never see and did not need to. That was enough. That had always been enough. She flew the little airplane the way she flew everything, with the minimum of motion and the maximum of precision, with a conversation, not an argument, between her hands in the air, with everything she had, with everything she was, with everything she had ever been, and everything she had given away, which turned out in the end to be the same thing and the only part of any of it that was ever going to last. And far below her and far ahead of her, in 100 cockpits, she would never sit in on 100 Tuesdays that had not happened yet. The sky was already getting ready to ask. And someone she had taught was going to answer, every single time.